All right, hello everyone. We are going to continue with the distinction, and we can continue saying hi and so forth, just kind of getting started. But we'll continue today with the distinction about passive-aggressive, where we're like a fish in water, where we're realizing that by default we're going to operate that way and seeing why, and our minds will operate that way, automatically. And then, not then, but in doing that, there's a distinction that I'm getting clearer on regarding successive approximation. So I've always kind of had a sense that I was missing something there, a distinction that could make it clearer. And I have something that's great. Over time I might even get more clear on it, but there's something I have for you now that'll be helpful, or very helpful. And then that also is going to relate, both those ideas, the passive-aggressive versus being respectful alchemist, these all relate. The successive approximation distinction that I'll give you. And then these relate to feedback and how we deal with feedback. Because how we deal with feedback, like when we're dealing with objectives and achieving a particular goal, success, how we're dealing with people and conversations, it's just constant in our lives, right? Like in one sense, just even kind of glancing at the idea of happiness, something is going on where how we deal with feedback with both success and happiness, right? Like if we deal with what life throws at us, right, and what we just get back in all kinds of ways. In essence, every moment gives us new feedback, right? How we deal with it is going to be one very core, pretty much either foundational or very close to the foundation of our success and happiness, right? So that's one of those concepts that is going to constantly bear fruit in looking at, and I think we're already doing that, right? We've looked at feedback all the way through, but I think I'll have more for you today, and certainly this distinction. And overall, we're talking about influence, but by spending 2 sessions on this passive-aggressive distinction, then again, what we're trying to do is get to the core, get foundational here in alchemy, where we have meta strategies and things that make the more surface strategies work and easier, and things you can read in books about influence and persuasion and so forth. You'll have a very different foundation at the core, right? And it'll all be so much more effective. And so, hello everyone. Thank you, Shema. We're super lucky to be with you too, David. It's time of the Alchemy launch. Yeah, I think before I started the recording, I was saying how happy I am about just such a wonderful group that we have. Yep, thanks, Joseph, who writes, wow, time to be changed for the better. And Darmender says, I love to be on Alchemy. And good evening, Frederico and Julie and Brian. Good morning, huh? Where are you, Julie? Are you out there in Australia or something? Megan and Chad and Elise and Susanna, great. Wow, okay, we got a lot of people on. Let's see if I'm getting a response to that. Sometimes I don't start the recording when I'm saying hello to people, but I thought this time I'd switch it up and have a little bit of the greetings on the recording. All right. All right, so I have kind of a big slide here. So what I'm seeing is that, and this is mostly something that I've been doing and that I kind of feel my way through, but I think I have more of a sense of how to explain it now. And so what I wrote here on top of the slide is successive revealing versus successive approximation. Over the coming days, weeks, months, even a year, I might have even more things that I realize about this. Maybe I'll even change the word approximation and say, oops, successive approximation can be done right if you're using successive revealing versus, and then I figure out something to call sort of, not even the wrong way to do things, but a way to do things that is, it might be okay to be running sometimes, to happen sometimes, but it'll predictably get stuck. Our way of representing getting stuck with successive approximation that that then we can apply to conversations, going on for tasks, or even being afraid or anything like that, where our brain predictably gets stuck by default a lot. And it doesn't really tell us we're stuck. It usually just tells us we're frustrated, angry, bored, afraid, right? Overwhelmed, confused, right? It gives us kind of negative feelings when it feels stuck. But it doesn't say, hey, I'm stuck. It's super easy to unstick me if you just do X. It doesn't say that. Or else it would be kind of easy. Once we interpret all of those emotions or anything else where we're stuck, once we know to look for that and how to use scenarios and in a sense just common sense, once you realize that your mind is just stuck as like a mechanism, then it's actually fairly easy to unstick it. It's the not realizing that you're kind of getting stuck. And getting stuck might not feel like you don't know what to do. It might feel like you do know what to do, and that is to get angry at somebody and just keep repeating yourself and say, you don't understand me, you don't understand me, and just keep talking. And maybe actually the person would understand you differently if you stopped and were an alchemist, right, and created a space for them to talk, right? Often if you're not able to have someone understand you, presumably letting someone else talk does two things. You understand where they're at better, and then also their mind isn't jammed up with their thoughts, and they can listen to you better, right? So I just say that as just a quick example of what getting stuck might look like. It doesn't necessarily mean our body isn't moving or we don't know what to say. Okay, so and our go-to illustration can be either local peaks or local basins. These are the exact same concept, just the gravity is reversed and whatever's easy to picture. The local basins idea would be if you imagine water running down like a hill. There aren't really a lot of natural circumstances exactly like that. A little bit, actually that could be. But if water's running down a hill, actually this is easy to picture kind of naturally. And then if there's some places where there's puddles, right? Why is that happening? Some of the water doesn't get all the way to the bottom of the hill because there can be local basins, right? Little places where naturally there's like a depression, like a little hole carved out. And so water, in that case, is successfully approximating its way down the hill, and we might say down to the bottom, but the water itself doesn't see the bottom, right? It's not, the bottom isn't really an objective. What the water is doing is actually there could have been someone that maybe was thinking, all right, I want water to go down to the bottom, so I'm going to program it with an algorithm. God isn't doing that. I'm just saying someone could be. There could be a situation where there's like something that's programmed. But then once you program the algorithm, whatever ends goal the programmer had in mind is actually now irrelevant. That was only relevant for the programmer in helping them program this algorithm into, in this case, like the water. I know I'm maybe a little bit mixing metaphors from a robot versus water, but as I continue this scenario illustration, it'll probably make sense. So the water follows an algorithm, essentially, which is that it basically gravity, right? It wants to go down. But it doesn't want to in the sense of a person. And I point this out because the mind is similar. The mind isn't really aware like you are. The mind is more like water, where it's following algorithms. It doesn't want to do something. The water doesn't want the same way you consciously feel like you want something, right? We anthropomorphize it. We could say it wants to go down, and that makes sense to a degree. And of course, it breaks down at a certain point if we start to think that the water actually actively is trying to and thinking about how to get down. But in one manner of speaking, it's correct to say that the water wants to go down. But despite the fact that there's like sort of an algorithm, just simplistically put, like gravity, getting the water to go down, some of the water won't go all the way down to the bottom of the hill, right? It'll get stuck in these local little holes or basins or depressions in the soil or the rock or whatever, right? It might be a natural or some kind of man-made thing. So in that way, it's getting stuck. And it's getting stuck based on the algorithm it's following, like where it'll go down as long as there's kind of nothing, like where it doesn't have to go up again, right? And the problem there, which is easy to see with the water, is that it'll once it gets in a basin, unless something kind of bounces it back up, it'll just sit there. It can't go down. There's nowhere nearby. Anywhere that it kind of goes, as water travels, just kind of close by itself with surface tension or whatever, it can't, it isn't going to be able to get out of that basin. And that's what's going on with your mind. And that's kind of successive approximation. And again, it's not wrong, but it operates in a certain way where it's just algorithm based. It looks like it's trying to reach an objective, but that objective is no longer part of what's going on. Just like reaching the bottom of the hill is no longer really part of what's going on for the water. All that's going on is that the water has kind of a pre-programmed meaning about feedback, in a sense. I'm a little bit stretching things, but it has like a pre-programmed way of doing things. The objective of being at the bottom of the hill doesn't exist anywhere in the water. All that exists is again, what I'm calling the algorithm, the way of operating, right? As long as there's a close by way to get farther down, right? Then go down is one way to put it. If I show the local peak illustration, it'll be similar, and I'll give it to you quickly to remind you and to show you the same concept in a different way. And so that if there's any confusion with what I'm talking about with the water, it might get cleared up. If we had a series, it doesn't even have to be on an actual mountain range, it could just be in a large gymnasium, and we somehow build what amounts to, or we have a lot of sand, or I don't know, gravel or whatever, and we make like different hills in this big gymnasium, and some are higher than others. And then we program a robot who's able to walk on this gravel without falling over, let's say. And the robot can't see, but the robot can sense if it's getting higher or lower. And we're thinking, all right, we want the robot to climb as high as it can. Well, if we program the robot, we might say, all right, robot, take a step. And if you're higher after you take that step, like your little altitude sensing, little sensor there, if it registers higher, then take another step in the same direction. If it registers lower, then turn at random. And we could say, turn 90 degrees. And 90 degrees is basically no different than random for this algorithm. So either way will work. And so now if we run that algorithm, and then we can think about tweaking the algorithm in a minute, but let's imagine that we run that algorithm, then what will happen, right? What will happen is the robot will climb to the top of whatever little local peak, right, little local hill in that gymnasium of gravel that we place it on. Because once it gets to the top, like if it takes a step and it takes it down, it'll spin around. Now, it might be, if it starts out kind of in between two peaks or close to the bottom of one peak, it might, by randomness, walk over to the base of another peak. But as soon as it starts climbing up a bit, right, then there's a greater and greater probability that it won't leave that peak that it's on, right? Like it'll either, and now let's imagine, just to picture the robot walking, let's imagine it's about halfway up a particular local peak of gravel. Then what'll happen? If it takes a step and it goes down, then it'll turn at random, and then it takes another step. And then if it goes down, it'll turn at random again. Once it takes a step and it's going up, if it takes a step in the same direction, then it might not go straight up, but it'll at least kind of wind around until it'll just keep walking. It'll keep basically going up until it hits the top, right? You see that? Notice how that pretty much is automatically going to happen, right? The only possibility, as I said, is that if it's sort of near, if we put it near the bottom of one peak where it's kind of near like one of the valleys, in between two peaks, then through random chance it might go over to the other valley if it doesn't figure out it doesn't randomly turn in a way that takes it up to the peak that it's on. But the chance gets smaller and smaller as it gets to the top, and once it's on the top, all it'll kind of do is just keep spinning around, right? It'll like take a step and spin around, take a step, spin around. Pretty much stay stuck. The reason I'm getting into this again is that it can really help us to see here how your mind, we think that our mind is going for certain goals, when in actuality what happens if we don't pay attention to doing this right when we're going after an objective on purpose, then what's going to happen is you're going to figure that you're going after a goal, like you want a client to say yes to you, or you want a person to agree with what you're saying. which could be saying yes, to a proposal or whatever. Or there's no one else involved. Let me think. You think that whatever, you're looking to make a certain amount of money in a month, or just feel good about yourself. Maybe you just want to feel happy. Then if you're like telling your mind, I want to feel happy, then what happens is, what your mind does is it converts that objective. Then this is by default, and you can on purpose think things through with scenarios, which communicates back and forth with your mind. I've given you, without getting too much into it, just because I've always been saying something, so I prioritize what I get into. But when you, as a kind of a quick shortcut, when you're thinking in scenarios, and I had that one good webinar where I showed how it doesn't have to be really vivid, but just enough that you're, just like I talked about just now. What I give you is scenarios when I walked you through the algorithms for the water or the robot, right? And I've done this a lot with you guys with scenarios. When you're thinking in scenarios, right, which are kind of illustrations that are sort of like mimic generally how real life looks, or fantasy real life could look, but not just words that are kind of disconnected. When you're thinking in scenarios, then you are communicating back and forth pretty well with your mind. You're kind of checking over that your mind really gets something. So using that, you can get goals done right. And here's what we want to realize is that, and this is a pretty major, massive thing that I'm telling you. By default, you'll have an objective and you'll be going after it. And what your mind is going to do is it's going to convert that objective, like the water trying to get to the bottom of the hill. It's going to convert that objective into an algorithm that presupposes the meaning of feedback. That decides, like if you want to date somebody, then your mind converts that by default into that you want them to give you certain feedback and that you don't want to have other feedback. And the original objective actually then kind of becomes irrelevant in practice. It becomes irrelevant. And it might pop up later if you think about it again and maybe your mind somewhat tweaks the algorithm. But usually that's through a bunch of pain, like oh, this feedback is just, I feel confused, overwhelmed, and then you eventually kind of sit down and rethink, think about it again. But really the same thing happens over and over again, even if it gets sort of rethought. The mind just somewhat tweaks its expectations, which is just another word for the meaning of feedback and the value that we put to the number of sales we make, or whether a client says yes, or what sort of signals that a significant other or potential significant other gives us. So that's one major thing right there, what I just described, is your brain converting, and this is something I'm discovering more and more clearly. I've talked about related thoughts to this previously in Alchemy, but I haven't described it in this way yet, and just because I realized too more clearly over the last week or a few days. But this is probably pretty major, at least as a starting point, at least as a seed. Then it's just a massive thing to realize, holy cow, I think I'm going after certain goals. But what actually happened is my brain converted those goals into an algorithm where it's giving presupposed meaning to feedback. And now the original goal is gone, and I'm just being like water, or my mind is, and it's going to get stuck. It might not get stuck. The water might get to the bottom of the hill, or it might get stuck. But it's all based on the feedback working out at that point. It's not based on a properly built context, because you can have this terrific way to both be happy and successful, where we learn to kind of make our own algorithm, but one in which no matter, here's the key, right, or another key, no matter what the feedback is, and this is where seeking understanding is the shortcut I've already given you, but this will help you understand it better. Sometimes I give you something and describe it decently, but then as you get even more foundational and see what the heck is going on with it, it becomes way more usable for you. Or you go from not using it to using it. The seeking understanding shortcut or hack or whatever, it's the way where, again, what you really want to do in life is whenever you have an objective, you want to make it so no matter what the feedback is, you eventually win. You see, and that's also what I mean by win then attack, is once you develop a plan where no matter what goes on, you're going to get to your goal. And we do that. Successive approximation is the term that I'm using now, and I might tweak that term over time. So but anyway, for now, it's when the algorithm gets programmed in, like with the water or like with the robot, and the objective is no longer being sought or compared to. Essentially, it feels like maybe it is. Like you don't realize it's happening, of course, but you end up where your goal ends up being for certain feedback, or however you want to put it. The problem with that is now you're like the water, where it's not just that you feel upset a lot when that happens. You do. It hurts your happiness, but it actually screws up your ability to succeed, because every time you get stuck in a local basin or peak, you're just stuck, and you don't even know what's going on. You just feel like something's wrong, and you just kind of try to push through it somehow, and in practice that can often just create more resistance. Or maybe you get through it, but you're just exhausted, right? Or you create it, again, more like a blowback from people that you're interacting with by just pushing them and so forth. With successive revealing, I've talked about this all along, but now I'm relating it to this whole successive approximation idea. Then you treat feedback, instead of presupposing, you basically keep the original objective as, like, instead of an algorithm where you're assigning meaning to feedback in advance, where you already know what you think you want to hear back from the person you're dating or with, right? Or you already know what results mean you make progress. Or you can buy a course, and people will come into OMG sometimes, and they already think they know what'll help them learn and what won't, or what structure or what information or what is going to make them make money. But that doesn't really make a lot of sense, or else they'd already be making money if they already knew what structure was going to help them, right? Sometimes this is successful. Everyone's successful sometimes, right? One thing that can happen is if we just don't get stuck from the environment. And the other thing, and sometimes just feedback is okay. Like sometimes the meaning that, like the algorithm that our mind makes for us just ends up in practice working. A combination of the goal being doable and the environment not messing you up too badly and so forth, right? And so as kind of a default thing, it's perfectly fine. It is the way that a mind has to operate without being intentionally interacted with. But with successive revealing, you don't switch the objective you're trying to have, like having finding someone great to date. You and presupposing what a first date was going to look like that'll start that out, or what a person will say to you. Maybe if someone was doing the successive approximation thing, maybe someone just acting really interested and attentive to them and flattering them and so forth and hopping into bed with them right away will fit the feedback that the mind just kind of automatically programs in with successive approximation, right? But that could be different from the actual progression that might lead to a successful relationship. That could happen to lead to a successful relationship, what I described just now. But maybe you meet someone and you are favorably disposed towards each other, but it's not like a massive yes fest right off the bat, and maybe you're getting to know each other. And whatever, there's different stuff. Obviously, we can imagine a successful relationship starting out where it doesn't just look like perfect feedback the whole time in the beginning. And and for sure we can imagine what looks like great feedback where we're so excited, this is so great, we have everything in the world in common with this person, and then it falls apart, in a few weeks or a couple months or something. With successive revealing, you're keeping the original objective in mind. You're not presupposing that you know what it means when someone says something. or you're working in a joint venture partnership, or you're working with a client that you already started with, and they say something to you. And what I do is I don't necessarily know what that means. When someone says something to me, I don't just assume I know exactly what they mean. Of course, if it's fairly innocuous and pretty mundane, it's not like I don't think I know anything about what they mean either, right? You wouldn't be revealing anything if there was no meaning to be had in any feedback. But there's a way that you can compare the feedback with the objective and let it kind of reveal more. It's almost more complicated to say than to do, right? There's a way that that might be fairly obvious in practice. It's hard to know. Like, I'm only me, so I don't really know how obvious this will feel to you once I say what I'm saying here. But there's a way that we can just talk to people, interact with our own minds, interact with our own endeavors, where we're trying to, again, like rank a website or do something with a project for ourselves, or solve a crime, right? We can picture, I know that we're not actually crime-solving detectives for the most part here, but it's easy to picture, right? Where instead of looking at a crime scene and presupposing what every piece of evidence or potential evidence means, or how important each thing is, then instead, doesn't it make more sense to like take note of things, not knowing what their full meaning is yet, right? Again, it's not like if there's a blood stain on the window, it isn't like that's fully meaningless, right? But it could have been planted there. It could have a variety of meanings. It could be the victim's blood. It could be the person who committed the crime, cut themselves, or whatever. It could be a third party, right? So there's some meaning to it. You don't look at it and say, I know nothing. That would make no sense either. You know something, but neither everything nor nothing. And then you keep in mind the final objective. And sometimes you're just accumulating things you don't know their meaning yet. But the more things you reveal, it just kind of works out, right? Like if you're having a conversation with someone and trying to get to know them and seeing if you guys would be a good fit as a client, if you don't know ahead of time exactly what, like if you don't just project, right? Like again, what will happen by default is someone will think, all right, I want to make the sale. And then the mind will convert that into what different feedback means and how it's supposed to respond to those. And how does the mind do that, by the way? The mind does that based on past associations, right? The mind assigns meaning to feedback it gets that meaning from somewhere. And it gets it from experiences and associations that were formed in the past. But associations that were formed in the past aren't necessarily accurate, right? Obviously, one person could say something, and in a different context from a different person, that same phrase could mean something very different. Someone could say something, and then it ends up meaning that they're going to backstab you in 3 days, but it doesn't mean that someone else who says something similar means the same thing. One person can say one potential client could say a number of things or communicate in a way, and they end up not buying. Another client might say a number of similar things and end up signing on with you. Clearly, a person who's like listening, right, who doesn't just project right, it's pretty easy to, at least in the sort of extremes, to picture the difference here between someone who sort of is really just kind of functioning on these associations, or just kind of feeling a meaning from what the client is saying every second, and just talking a lot, right? And just basically trying to push to a result that they want. And part of even that pushing and not letting the other person talk so much might be sort of a fear of feedback too. Trying to think here. But then in another conversation, we could imagine somebody where they're not jumping to conclusions, they're not worried, they're not really afraid, because you're also just not afraid in life. There's a way that when you need a certain type of feedback, I know, because another thing, if someone's giving a presentation in kind of the wrong way, then it's almost like for some people, almost the only feedback they're aware of that they know that they want is the person to say yes. So it's like they don't even want any other feedback. Like they're not even open to it, almost. Or they just kind of want approval and a yes. And so they just like talk, and then want the other person to like show approval and nod, and then they want to talk some more and the person to show approval, like and nod, right? And almost anything else is like kind of could be a problem. If you imagine kind of a particularly extreme example of someone who's not good at having a conversation or persuasion or sales or whatever. By contrast, a person who's particularly good, they use their past associations, like their past experiences in selling people, more like to ask questions, like to understand potential meanings of things that that the other person's saying back. And it lets them ask some more questions, give some more, almost the word that came to mind is bait, but not in a negative connotation. It's like sometimes you're not asking a question of somebody, but neither are you just talking and talking. You're kind of dangling something out there. You're just kind of saying something that's a little bit open-ended, or right, like the problem with questions is at some point it can feel like a grilling, depending on how you do it. But sometimes you're just talking a little bit, but you're just kind of stimulating, right? Just like stimulus when I say bait. But you're stimulating in order to, you're getting more feedback, and feedback is helpful, but it doesn't feel like you don't. The problem is if feedback, again, it's presupposed, where it's either painful feedback or else it's like approval feedback, and that's the only two types of feedback. You're not really learning anything that's helping you create and navigate in a helpful way, right? And basically be smart. Instead, it's all just about feeling like you're getting closer to the goal, and that's what you want, right? And when a conversation or a sales presentation or your own project that you're doing on your own, where you're trying to accomplish something, when it just devolves down into you want a feeling of progress, and you're trying to avoid a lack of a feeling of progress or a feeling of regress, because the wrong process got stuck in your mind about the goal. The goal is actually not really even there to be compared to, because and we can prove this, that the goal sort of goes away and it just becomes like a feedback algorithm. Because if you stop somebody who's like getting angry or upset or frustrated, and you ask them intellectual, not that they would answer, but just if you hypothetically ask them right now in your mind, or you ask yourself, you think of a time when you reacted in a way that felt right at the time, but it was just sort of frustrated or angry or bored or whatever. And if you ask, if you really had the objective in mind, was that what you would do as like the best strategy for going forward from that moment and achieving your objective? And if clearly not, right, then if someone was just acting out of fear or frustration about not having the right feedback, or just triumph, where they just felt like they were making progress and they were on a high, but actually they never were. Like a robot who's climbing a local peak might actually be taking himself farther from the actual highest peak, right, in that room. Or water that's traveling down a basin might feel like it's making great progress. If there's like a deep hole, it might feel juiced the whole time that it's traveling downward, but then it ends up stuck in a hole. The whole time it's actually making negative progress, because very negative. The only way to get out to where it's really trying to get to would be to go all the way back up the side of the hole, right, and down the right way. So either we could be on a high, and this is really easy to see with a bad relationship, a bad client, a bad chasing after a shiny object, even just on your own project, or heck, I mean, I felt this way during school. I felt like I was making great progress for like 15 or more years, right? And it all, if my diploma had been issued in nice soft toilet paper material, then at least I could have gotten some use out of it once, right? Before I flushed. As it was, I've got zero use out of it. And I thought I was making progress the whole time. And in my case, I wasn't. Other people, they go on and use their degree sometimes, don't get me wrong. But in my case, I thought I was making progress and I wasn't. And other times I would be upset, right, or really fearful that I would do badly on a test, right, especially in college when it could ruin my whole pre-med track. And so being both afraid and euphoric, all for nothing. I just want to make sure I don't lose my main thread that I'm on here. So we're talking almost about successive approximation. If we do it right, if we do it wrong, and I was comparing two people doing different presentations, and how, I was proving law of non-contradiction, taking something a little bit to an extreme or a scenario that's clear. If there's times when you can look back where you were supposedly going after a goal, and an easy way to picture it is like being angry or frustrated for a while. There's plenty of other similar things, but that's more obvious, so it's more of an extreme. Makes it easier to see. So if you think of a time when you were just acting frustrated or angry, maybe even talking to someone else about how frustrated or angry you were, and then think, wait a second, if I genuinely was going after the objective that I supposedly was that really the most efficient way to go after it if I look at it kind of objectively or intellectually or wisely? Clearly the answer is going to be no in that case. And if not, think of one where it is clearly no. If that's the case, that you can remember a time when you were supposedly going after an objective, but it felt so right for you just to get angry or frustrated or whatever, and dwell on that, then that's a proof that your mind can go into a default process where the objective is actually not kept in mind, so to speak. It's discarded, essentially. It's only used to create the algorithm for what feedback you want. And then the objective actually loses its power, and you just want that feedback now, and you're afraid of negative feedback. And that's very inefficient. It's only useful if it's the last resort somehow, right? But clearly overall, as a go-to strategy for achieving your objectives and happiness, it's incredibly counterproductive. Let's compare that to successive revealing. With that, we like on purpose look in our mind, look in our mind with a scenario. We can think about we're going to meet with a client, and we can think, look, I don't know ahead of time what feedback looks like. I also know I can't control the situation. I can't know for sure that it's going to be a good fit. So first of all, I'm not going to say that I definitely want to have this person as a client or as a relationship partner of any sort, or whatever other situation it might be. Or maybe someone cheated on you, and you trying to deal with that situation. I had someone ask me a question about it related along those lines. First of all, being upset about that is an example of the original objective. Like if someone really wants to be happy in a relationship or in a relationship with a particular person. Let's just go straight to a relationship with a particular person. Now, it's a little bit limiting to say I want to be happy in a relationship with a specific person. But let's say you're committed. In that case, it kind of makes it reasonable, right, by stipulation. But the same logic will apply either way, whether you overall just want to be happy in a relationship, regardless of a specific person, or whether you wanted to work with a specific person. And let's suppose you wanted to work with a specific person, and yet they previously cheated on you. And previously could have been yesterday. Maybe they lied about it originally, and then they did it. And then you found out. Well, first of all, you decide what's the objective. Shockingly enough, by me pointing this out, I'm showing you that your mind, by default, will constantly actually lose sight of objectives. It discards objectives once it figures out what feedback it wants. So the very fact you're upset about them cheating on you is because you're just in this wrong type of successive approximation mode of wanting a certain type of feedback and not another. You let your mind set you up for failure. If there's feedback that can make you upset or get you stuck, then the goal is set up wrong in the first place. So you set yourself up for failure rather than for inevitable success. Let's suppose, though, you stipulate, I want to be happy with this person, and I'm gonna follow through on that at least for the next 6 months, or until some other event happens, until I find out they cheated on me a second time. If they do that, then I will end things. But now, okay, so now if that's our objective, is to be happy with that person, then obviously we need to accept reality, including we need to accept that person fully. I don't even remember all I meant to look it up, but I didn't. What are those 4 stages of grief, right? But some of them are like denial and maybe anger, and maybe one of them is disbelief. It might be disbelief, anger, and denial, and so forth. But then what is their acceptance? So, but like when you think about it wisely or clearly, like an alchemist, then obviously acceptance is where you need to get to. What the heck are you going to do? Not accept the past? How moronic is that? right? Are you going to have a goal that the past is going to be different? Good luck with that. Write to me if you find out a way to change the past. All right, I got a few things I can change myself. So go straight to acceptance, or else you're just, like, again, the fact that people go through those other stages of like anger, disbelief, maybe disbelief and denial are the same thing. Maybe there's something else, shock, maybe is one of them. I don't know. You can look it up online, whatever the stages are of grief. But it's not just grief, right? It's the same thing if basically all this stuff, until you accept things. Until you accept something, whatever reality is right now, whatever's already happened, always, 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 guaranteed, it makes sense to accept it. The alternative is to have a goal to change the past. By the law of non-contradiction, that's clearly wrong, right? It doesn't match. Unless you can change the past, which I already told you. Write to me. Let me know how. But even it's not a scientific thing. It just clearly can't happen. It's already done. So we always want to accept instantly. There's never a case in which you want to delay accepting reality, including if the reality ends up being a person, and people are going to be a mixed bag to some degree, right? Then it involves fully accepting the person. Now, there might be things that it would be even better, like it's an opportunity. Once you fully accept a person, strengths, weaknesses, etc., or even something could be a strength, but some other people might be stronger, right? Maybe your person's super attractive, but there's someone out there who's even more attractive. Is that a strength or a weakness or what? Who knows? You accept the reality, then any improvement from the other person, and the same thing applies to clients and in business. It's just gold for you right now for dealing with people and getting the best out of people. Any improvement is an opportunity. You see? As opposed to like a problem that just has to be solved, like something negative you just can't live with. If you can't accept a person, then you need to be out of relationship with them as soon as possible. Maybe you need to finish up a few commitments or whatever. But literally, if you can't accept them, that's what it means. And if you do accept them, it means you just fully accept. You don't like halfway accept somebody. All that means is you have like two goals active at the same time in a contradiction, right? You can't accept them and not accept them at the same time. You can't like accept some of their some of their stuff and just not accept some other of their stuff because they're a complete package currently. You can't chop a person in pieces, in bits, right? You can't control the other person's mind directly. You'll have maximum influence over them the more you have this foundation with alchemy, right? However, it's not full control and immediate control. So you accept them. Now it's an opportunity, anything that they can improve. Now, what do we already know about opportunities? There's a bazillion of them, more than you can ever take advantage of right at the moment. And time is generally on your side when it comes to potential opportunities with people that you know improving. Because there's going to be opportunities, times where they're feeling more humble, more open, or where they see it in their parents. You know, they'll be like, I can't believe my mom does this. And you're like, yeah, I don't know anyone that does anything like that. And then they might say, oh, okay. And then it might be a little bit of an opening, right? And you don't want to open up like it's been on your mind and been bugging you, right? If you genuinely accept somebody, then you'll actually be much more convincing, influential. You'll come across properly when there is an opening. If you haven't been accepting it all along and you've been judging it in the wrong way, you can judge or assess or calculate that something is suboptimal, especially that a trait that someone has or actions they're taking is suboptimal, or even a contradiction to something they themselves affirm. It could be a contradiction just to what you want, which isn't necessarily inherently contradictory to them. But anyway, it can be, you can understand that it's clearly incorrect, at least based on stipulating something. You could say, if I stipulate that taking, crack cocaine is wrong, then I want to change their behavior. Or if I stipulate something even more simple than that, like that, being out of control or spending this much money, and then maybe that stipulation is wrong, maybe it's not. But anyhow, if you accept them, you can accept a person as a whole, right? It doesn't mean you accept that they're right about everything. Then you would never accept anyone, ever, right? Think about it. Again, I took it to the extreme just now quickly, and I show the opposite, right? Law of non-contradiction, taking things to the extremes. If if general acceptance of a person was the same as affirming that they're perfect in every way, and if they have a deal breaker, then they literally have a deal breaker. Then that means you literally don't accept them, which means you're not in a relationship with them. But you can't both accept them and not accept them. I keep stressing that. And the more you just have a simple, strong core of understanding of the world, and you're flexible, the more you can accept the vast majority of people, at least in a quarantined way. Like, not necessarily to like move into your house or or become your like 50-50 business partner and have access to your bank account. But you can accept plenty of people, because also you're accepting them relative to like a situation, like a quarantined situation, right? A particular venture, or just a transaction, or being your acquaintance, or whatever it might be, or working on a particular project. But either you instantly get out, or you accept them at least relative to that situation. And that can also help you accept people. I mentioned this before about quarantining. You just realize you're not accepting them in an overall generalized way necessarily. But if it's a relationship and they cheated on you, then you are accepting them if you're still with them, or even if you're still talking to them. You need to accept them. Like, if you're talking to them with any sense of wanting to get into a relationship, now you could say, look, I'm not going to get into a relationship with them unless they do this, that, and the other thing. Well then, like first, like they apologize in a certain way, they promise this, and they stop doing that. Well then you're not in a romantic relationship with them then. If you're, right, like if you're creating a new space, and you're not letting them inside it unless they conform to certain things, that's valid, but then you're not in a romantic relationship with that person, period. Until and unless that happens, and then you fully get that and you treat that as the case. And now you could say, I'm not in a romantic relationship with that person, but I'm also not going to be pursuing anybody else. I'm in a situation where I'm just for myself, not even to them, I'm committed to making it work. But then, if you're doing that, then you quarantine it. Once again, you say, within these parameters, this much time, until and unless they do this or don't do this, then I'm going to exclusively be focused on seeing whether things will work out with them. And you see, this is just about having one goal at a time, active. Because if you are thinking about whether to commit to even like trying to make things work for them, with them, not even in a relationship yet, but kind of like repair things, while trying to repair them, that's two active goals. Right? If you're thinking about whether to do something at the same time you're trying to do it, that's always a red flag, and you should recognize that from now on. So once you see you're doing both those things at once, then you decide whether you want to go for it, and you just put parameters or boundaries, whatever, on it, on the pursuing it, and then you pursue it fully within those parameters. So that could either mean you're still in a relationship with them, and that in which case you fully accept them, or you are trying to make it work with them, and you're not in a relationship yet, but if they do certain things, then you will be. Then you need to accept at least everything else, except for except you have these hoops they have to jump through, and then they either jump through the hoops or don't. And then you have parameters on how long you're going to give them, how much effort, and so forth. And then when you start thinking about things this way, you really will feel better. And you can take what I just laid out for you and apply it to tons of other situations, including your own relationship with your own mind. Right? Dealing with your mind and other people's minds is actually extremely similar. Yeah, we have a little bit more direct sense of what's in our mind, but we really don't. We know what's in our consciousness field. What's in our consciousness field is not the contents of our minds. It's just related to it. We don't have direct access to other people's consciousness fields, so sure, that's a limitation, right? So we have kind of doubly indirect access to someone else's mind. Although, I don't know, I mean, we can see their body and their reactions and sometimes their tone of voice and hear, like, see their face expressions and again, their tone better than they can. So in that way, we have certain access to their mind that they don't, other people. And they might have more confirmation bias about, how smart and good they already are. So, so really, there's differences, but there's also a lot of similarities in principle to dealing with your own mind and other people's minds. So I'll go on to some next lines in a minute. But the bottom line is, when you want to go for any objective, then and the more you do this, the more it becomes quick and obvious to do, and the more it's more even habitual, perhaps, for your mind, the best I can tell. But it's hard for me to differentiate right now, for sure. It might be that the precursors are there, and then I kind of do it, kind of consciously, quickly, or maybe my mind just does it more habitually by itself. I'd have to think about that, and or I might forget to think about it. But anyway, to set an objective so that you'll both be happy and have the best chance of success, then you want to set things up for success by getting ready for any feedback to just to increase your understanding, not even because you know the full meaning of that feedback, but you'll know some meaning that'll reveal something to you, and it can reveal more questions. It could reveal more, this is like a question, but like more places to look, whatever, right? And when I say successive revealing, right, like the more you have a conversation with someone, in a lot of cases, the more they talk, right? Probably you want to, especially if you're trying to influence somebody, then they should probably be talking. I don't know what the exact amount is, but maybe 2/3 or 3/4 of the time, right? Because you get a lot more revealing done when they're talking. If you don't talk at all, then that could be a problem for revealing stuff. Some of what they'll reveal is their reaction or response to things you say. So I'm not being overly simplistic in saying that you only get stuff revealed when they talk. But I just do this constantly. I'm not saying I'm perfect with it, but I have confidence. But whenever I talk about win then attack, that's what I mean. Is when I have a plan for things, it's not going to be about whether it succeeds by a certain like time frame. I already know that a certain number of sales means I succeed, and a certain number of sales means I fail, like on a product launch or something. Or if I'm doing a particular task, or if I'm talking to somebody, I don't like have a behavior in mind very typically, like a lot of people do when they're talking to people. They have like a behavior they want, and a behavior is like a feedback, but someone doing or behaving, or a behavior can also be when they're talking, right? Or when they do an action, they do something you want, or they say something you want, right? And you want that from someone, then that's a behavior, and it's feedback. And people have this already kind of presupposed often when they're talking to someone. They want the person to say or do something. And then they end up just kind of simplistically pushing to get it. And I pretty much don't do that. I don't have a lot of direct, I have just the ultimate outcome in mind. And it isn't like a behavior that person does right now, typically. If it's something simple, and you don't have to go overboard with this. If someone's agreed to something, they usually do it. Certainly I can ask my wife to go ask me to do something simple that she's happy to do, or someone I work with to do. But even then, if they resist or say no, or have an alternative, right, then that's not like the end of the world. Of course, we all operate that way to some degree, but there's a way that way too often people have a behavior, either words or actions that they just want someone else to do when they're in conversation with them. And they kind of have it all. It's all like an algorithm, right? They're just kind of behaving like a robot towards another person, trying to get them to do or say what they want. And I noticed there's a clear difference in how much and how pervasively, it's a pretty large difference in practice that I observe in how I don't do this with people. And of course, it's not about me being good or great. Again, when I'm testifying, it's just kind of about what kind of just gives you more of a sense of what I'm talking about. But I might have an overall objective, but it's not usually exactly what that person needs to do right now, typically, in most cases. And then I'm talking to somebody, and it just helps me, it just successfully reveals that'll help me on my way to the objective that I'm looking for. If it's a product launch, and maybe you can imagine I'm trying to create a product, I don't even know exactly what it is yet, and the launch, I'm not even sure when the launch will be. And I start talking to the people I work with, right? You see, I'm just successfully revealing. And by doing that, then I know I'm going to get to a great product and a great plan, and I just keep on revealing stuff. And I get there. But that's just how I approach pretty much anything. If you're looking to have a great relationship or be happy in a relationship with somebody, then you keep that objective in mind and stop thinking that you know what is going to lead to that. Maybe a bunch of tough conversations is on the way to getting there. But by keeping the objective in mind, it's constantly easy to get there. Remember what I said about that illustration about thinking when you might have been very angry and clearly you weren't doing something that you would affirm now. You weren't acting in a way that was best for the objective that you really wanted. And you could probably imagine this in romantic relationships at some point in our past, right? Where supposedly we want to be in a happy relationship with that person, and yet we certainly weren't acting as if that was our goal in the moment. There's a way that you can think and operate and lead your mind to where that goal really is taken into account, like alchemy, added, mixed in, and not like excluded as one of the building blocks there of your feelings and reactions. It's constantly kind of there. And it makes it so much easier to react in a way that's in line with actually achieving what you want. Because again, it's not about just responding or reacting to feedback. Sometimes you'll read that you want to think and respond, not just react, right? You want to think before you act and so forth. And people say clever stuff like that, but this sort of gets to much more deeply about what's going on with that. But what that means is you're stopping and you're recalling the actual objective that you're going for. If you find yourself just reacting to feedback in a way that doesn't seem all that useful, and really include when you're euphoric, all right? Not just when you feel frustrated or angry, but often people will feel euphoric about progressing, and stop and make sure that you're heading actually towards your objective in that case, and that not just that you're getting a bunch of feedback that seems right. Right? The iconic example is if a woman is just excited about you and sleeping with you every day and so forth, and you might feel, someone might feel euphoric and then think, wait, am I really going really going for the objective that I want? Maybe at the same time you're spending a lot of money on them, or you're spending all giving them 10 hours a day of attention. Is that actually a good strategy for having a good long-term relationship? Because what happens when I inevitably can't spend that much money and give that much attention to somebody, right? Or what's really, remember I talked about thinking about bottlenecks. What's really going to be the bottleneck? The first issue is having chemistry, and maybe you clearly do. But the next bottleneck is how you guys are going to deal with inevitable disputes that come up, and times when one person wants one thing, another person wants another thing. And the dispute might not be obvious. It might be passive-aggressive, right? It might be there's no obvious dispute at all, but there are these different vectors, and the person feels like they're just giving and giving, or they're being ignored or something. And so if you're on this euphoria kick, then you might not be stopping and thinking, wait, what's my real objective, and what's the real bottleneck for the objective, and what are the real building blocks that I want, right? Building blocks and bottlenecks are what a smart planner is using, not just feedback that are making progress. That is unhelpful, even if it's positive feedback or, that sort of thing. So regardless, you're comparing with your actual objective consistently and making sure that you're paying attention to building the right building blocks and what the bottlenecks might be coming up. Again, in relationships, example, like under the surface or on the surface differences in what people want, tension, and so forth. When it comes to trying to make a sale with a client, you might be feeling euphoric partway through your interaction. I wouldn't even think of it as a presentation, by the way, because a presentation kind of assumes this sort of that the other person has in mind exactly what they want, where they already know the feedback they want. And right, you can kind of put someone else in this mode too, or kind of reinforce this mode. Instead, if you guys are both kind of successfully revealing and collaborating together, if you almost start with a vision of what the person wants, right? Again, if you're successfully revealing, it's intuitive to talk about vision. I remember I haven't done this much because I didn't really pursue this angle in life, but I was on a little, I don't know what forum or it was in the form of actually on the phone, but there was a few people and an interviewer, and it was about the datings and relationships, and they asked the question of what you might ask the person on a first date, and the other responses were all just kind of right out of Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, or kind of pick up 101. But what I said was, well, I would ask what their vision was for like a happy relationship. And I wasn't trying to be clever. I mean, to me, that's just obvious. But you see, if I was selling a client, it'd be the same thing, and I do this. I do this with people I work with when I venture with somebody, and so forth. I want to get their vision, and then first we collaborate on the vision and get kind of a shared vision, and then I act in a way where we're kind of successfully revealing. towards getting there. And then that kind of pulls them into that mode. And once the vision is discussed, then it's much easier for the person to keep it clearly in mind, right? And then you can refer back to it. And so that's the kind of thing I would do. I don't really, otherwise there's not a whole lot of point. Sure, you can sort of have some interaction to get them motivated to get to the point where they want to talk about a vision. I get that, right? So, but then once I realize I want to get to where we're talking about vision, then that gives me a semi-soft lock to go after, right? An objective that if I focus on it, I can get there. So now I'm building rapport, whatever, just talking to the person, enjoying, having fun, being humorous. But why am I building rapport? If you're trying to, like, I'm building rapport in order to get to the point where we talk about our vision for a happy relationship. And that is a better semi-soft lock typically than, and also just easier for me personally. I wasn't that good at just getting people to hop into bed or something like that. Just based on also just my culture and everything. I wasn't around people that did that much when I was younger, and so I didn't really get a feel for it. But yeah, just getting there, semi-soft lock for building relationships. And you can do that in a relationship you're in, right? You can go after, you guys talk about your vision for a happy relationship, and maybe your relationship has kind of deteriorated or gotten kind of neutral to the point where you can't even go straight there. But then you can go after that as a semi-soft lock. I bet if you focus on it a little bit and kind of build some happy interactions with the person, make sure you accept them, you're not judging them, and clear out a few things that might be getting in your way, and then you can get to the point where you guys do have a discussion about a vision for a happy relationship together. And then you can work on it from there. It becomes much easier and once you kind of keep that vision in mind and you don't let it just become based on assuming that means this, that, and the other thing, where we do this twice a day and we do that once a day and once a week we do this date and that sort of thing. Then now it's devolved down again into just what feedback you're looking for, you see, an algorithm. You don't want to convert the vision to an algorithm, ever. You don't need to. You're conscious. You're aware. You can keep it going. You can just let it reveal, focus on what you know, and build from there. I don't mean you can't have some habits or some things that you try out, but it's not about like you stipulate. Instead of it being an algorithm, you can say, let's try having a date once a week. But that doesn't mean that if you don't, you're failing to achieve your vision. Instead, you're trying that to see if it fits into your vision, or if it, or what you understand, how it helps you further understand your vision. However you want to put it. You see, you never let things devolve down into just an algorithm for feedback. Whenever you find yourself too afraid or I don't know how to differentiate between like being appreciative of understanding versus euphoric about feedback, if that makes sense. But you want to kind of feel euphoric about gaining understanding rather than just getting feedback that could be misinterpreted or could be potentially false or whatever. All right, let me go down this slide some more. We need to have a plan for how, and I think I've mostly covered it, we need to have a plan for how feedback will be treated or else we'll lose control, right? And I covered this, but just reading what I wrote, we'll lose control of our minds, our objective conversations, etc. Right? If you're in a conversation with somebody, for whatever reason, if you don't have your vision and have it, again, you don't need to, it'll stay in your mind if you plan it properly where you don't let it devolve down to an algorithm. If you kind of picture your vision and affirm almost, or you kind of picture or look or prove by the opposite that you don't know exactly what feedback, like what the path to that vision will be, right? Like if you're going to have a conversation with someone and you don't know exactly what making a sale is going to look like. That if you did, then that's a bunch of semi-soft locks, right? You go after the first thing that you know that it's going to look like, the next thing that you know it's going to look like, etc. Then they're just those are objectives, not feedback. Feedback can be like converted into objective, but like an objective, kind of a goal for a certain type of feedback, like this algorithm thing I'm telling you about that you don't want. That's like a subset. It's like a type of goal that isn't typically helpful. But a semi-soft lock is a type of goal that is helpful, right? So if you know exactly the points along you're leading a client based on proper planning, systems, experience, like Cotton's velvet ropes, potentially, and so forth, and I'll have more to say about that in this next line, then fine. But if it's just the type of feedback you want, like of the type, I hope that they're smiling at me and doing this, that, but you don't really know, and it's pretty clear to you that when you think about it, that you're just kind of doing that feedback you're hoping for thing, as opposed to like semi-soft locks and clear milestones that are pretty understood that you want to reach. Oh, and also if you notice that, like, you play the scenario out in your mind and you think about hitting these milestones or these semi-soft locks or getting certain reactions from somebody, and imagine how when you get a reaction, you're using that to help you understand better rather than like, okay, yeah, that's what I want, or okay, yeah, that's what I want, right? Or oh no, I'm afraid, especially if you spot fear, right? Or you could ask yourself, if I achieved that objective, is it possible that would not be along the road of me achieving my final goal? So in selling a client and picturing that it's possible. There's all kinds of feedback people might like intuitively want, like incorrectly, from a client that is not actually on the way to them buying, or it could be on the way to them buying, or your services, but they might be a bad client. Like they might write you a check, but you might not have set things up well where it's going to work out well down the road, right? So if you find that as you play the scenario forward, and this can all take seconds to do once you're used to it, and then you find, wait a second, I'm going to get juiced by certain feedback by default that might not even, that I'll feel like is good feedback, but it might not even be an actual semi-soft lock or milestone, correct milestone along the way, right? Or stop along the velvet ropes or something, right? So if I'm going to feel happy about something that might not even help me or might even be counterproductive, and I've given many illustrations of this with dating, right, as well, then you know you're doing the wrong thing, where it's devolved down to this algorithm that's going to get you stuck in a local peak. Either euphorically stuck, either you're euphoric on the way and you're stuck, or you're frustrated on the way and you're stuck, but you're stuck, Or you get lucky and you get there sometimes, but other times you don't, and you live your life this way, and you're going to predictably feel unhappy and fail a bunch of times, more than 0% for sure. And then if you play the scenario forward and you think, okay, whatever feedback I get, it'll help me to understand. And you can say, you can think at some point, I might really know the semi-soft locks. I might really know the milestones I'm going for with the client. And then as I develop an understanding of those things, then I can go after those specifically. And whatever happens in this conversation, I'm going to, in one way or another, improve my understanding. I'm going to find more questions to ask. It's going to reveal something. I might not even know what's being revealed right away. Like when I have experiences with a client, I might not know right after the meeting all of what I might end up learning or figuring out from that. But it'll help my understanding if that's what I'm looking for. And by going into it seeking understanding, first of all, you can just plan better in the first place. Like you can just stop and realize things that I even talked about in my client getting recordings and so forth about what you might want to have in place. But then also you'll probably just make the sale better, right, in the first place. Plus you'll learn more. Plus you'll be happier. Plus you'll just set yourself up for inevitable success overall. Plus you'll be practicing a way of operating in life that's going to constantly lead to happiness and success with all your endeavors. All right, I wrote here that Cotton uses feedback, and I haven't exactly applied this to passive-aggressive versus respectful alchemist, but this is alchemy. So I talked last time a bunch about the respectful part of a respectful alchemist, and this is both alchemy and this is showing you where the passive aggressiveness is coming from with the feedback. So if you're doing the wrong way about this with the algorithms, that's when you start feeling passive aggressive. You get if you get the wrong feedback, right? You don't know what to do with it. You don't know whether to feel angry or shut up about it. Passive aggressive. But especially I'm showing you how to be an alchemist, part of the respectful alchemist versus passive aggressive here. Plus, of course, this has greater uses. It's like a meta strategy that can be applied to our current topic, but just applied to all your objectives. And the more you look at life this way, the more just very natural and easy it'll be to operate with people with influence, right? With being, again, a respectful alchemist instead of passive aggressive. The respectful part comes, remember, from the bottleneck with respect is when you don't feel like being respectful. Everyone can basically approximate or pretend to be respectful when they want to be. But then what happens is then people don't want to be. And one of the biggest things that erodes that is when you're successfully approximating norms and standards to have a self-image, right? This whole self-image thing is this algorithm for, originally the goal was to actually be an intelligent, good, smart person. That's a fine objective. But what does your mind do? I'm saying something also just earth-shattering right now. I'm kind of interrupting my thing here about the velvet ropes, but I'm about to say something very, very powerful in light of this, and I'm mixing it now with mixing this new concept of success revealing, success approximation I've been talking about. I'm mixing it with the self-image thing, and this might be the final aha that some of you need now or later to dissolve this self-image crap, the wrong way of doing it. Okay, so it is a fine objective to actually be a wise, intelligent, good, whatever else person, isn't it? That's reasonable. But what did your mind do when you were 5 or 6 or 12 or whatever? It converted that into an algorithm that's successfully approximating now. And it became all about figuring out what's normal for your peer group or the relevant group, religious group for certain morals, peer group for business and money, et cetera, et cetera. So it converted it all into obsessively figuring out what's normal, how are other people doing, and trying to live up to that, or be a little bit better than that, or not too much worse than it, depending on how that got calibrated. And that is exhausting, expensive, constantly conflicting, unattractive. It's constantly conflicting with whatever objective you're really going for, and it's based on, it reinforces this wrong way of doing things where, so your entire sense of self as a goal, an objective that is noble, being wise and good and so forth, got warped into an algorithm based on judging other people to find out norms, and then because your mind's always judging these norms, then it's fascinated with just seeing whether other people are conforming to them too. So you're judging others. That makes it very hard for you to be respectful towards people, because the minute you're judging someone, especially in a general way, but even in a specific way, most of our judgments are irrelevant. We only need to judge ever when it has to do with what we ourselves need to do, regarding like somebody else. And probably most of our judgments, even about specifics with someone, aren't really relevant. Like we can look at someone and say, man, their hair is messed up today, or why do they eat so much, or whatever the heck people might say, or this person talks too much, right? And that erodes your ability to respect that person, which is not helpful. And it's a little bit specific. You might say, oh, no, I'm not judging them overall. I'm just saying they talk too much. But why? Does that have something to do with what you're going to do? No, right? Not when you think about it that way. So the only purpose in judging, again, is to judge what you're going to do. In order to do that, you might need to get a sense of what other people, how people act regarding certain things and what they're good at and so forth. But you'll eliminate so much of the need for judgment if you realize that you can just cross off all the judgments that don't have something to do with you deciding what to do. And by what to do, I don't mean like whether to go criticize someone else or not for no reason, right? I mean, something that you do relevant, that's pressing, that you need to figure out what you're going to do. But the whole need for it, where it's coming from, that polluted water or whatever from the well, from your core that it's coming from, it's all based on this, and it's not foundational. You can just dissolve it as you see what I'm showing you. It's all just this BS algorithm. Instead, if you have a vision for being a good person, you can then inquire on what that might mean. Right? Well, it would mean a person with less and less contradictions in their mind, more and more of an understanding of what leads to good. Well, that's a terrific goal. You keep that vision in mind, but now you don't reduce it to an algorithm of trying to prove that you're already right and seeing how other people are doing. Right? What does that have to do with anything? Right? I've talked about one little red flag is when people have this goal to be the best at something. What the hell does that have to do with anything? Unless it's a specific competition that you're entering, like that's a game, that's delineated. or unless you're ranking a website, which is similar, where one person has to be number one and so forth. But generally speaking, maybe, as I said, you want to be 10 times better. You need to be 10 times better than the person who's best, but that has nothing to do with the other person. It just has to do with that's what's needed to accomplish this goal. With OMG, the number of people that have achieved success with OMG's coaching is like 100 times the next person. I mean, I don't know exactly, but that's pretty realistic. 100 times. But that's because I wasn't looking at what other people were doing. I just was trying to, I don't even want to say do as best as I could, but I was just trying to maximize. I was just trying to achieve that vision of people being successful with that one product. Right? I might have other products where the success is defined differently. More just like that people increase their skills and learn from great people and so forth. But then at least you want to achieve that objective. But it couldn't have been about being the best. Other times you're not going to be the best at something, but you don't need to be the best in the world or even the best in your neighborhood in order to solve a particular problem. You don't have to be the best, like objectively the best, like husband or wife in the world to be a fine husband or wife to the person you're with, right? Or the person doesn't have to be the best looking or whatever the heck, right? So the whole idea of being the best is moronic. You want to think about what's the threshold. What do you need to just to achieve an objective or solve a problem, and it's irrelevant how other people are doing. In most cases, unless the scenario, the situation stipulates, by stipulation, that you have to win, or that it only matters how you do relative to somebody else. Like with outrunning the bear, right? If the bear is chasing you and someone else, you don't have to outrun the bear, just outrun your friend. I mean, and I'm fully joking, of course, about that illustration. Hopefully find some better way, or maybe sacrifice yourself or whatever. Okay, so that can be huge for you, seeing how that applies to dissolving the self-image issue, because it's such a problem. And it's not about having a better or worse self-image. It's about how your mind goes about the vision of you being a good, smart, wise person. Right? Do you do it through successive revealing, or do you do it through successive approximation, try to prove how smart you already are? If the bad way is horrendous. It involves judging other people and yourself all the time and these norms, and it keeps you down because it keeps you from excelling past the norms of the people that you're around, keeps your income down, right? Your mind inherently is just trying to be good enough compared to the people you grew up around, or whatever, or the people you're around now maybe. And so forth. And OMGers certainly fall prey to this, right? Oh, I feel like I'm behind. Oh, of course we benefit from being around people that are making more money. That at least it gets us out of like poverty mentality. But ultimately, you don't want to be thinking about it this way at all. You're not trying to make money to prove that you're already good enough and smart enough, for God's sakes, right? You're making money so that you can survive comfortably, stop worrying about money, and then you might still make money in order to help people, or you might do something else in order to help people. But you get yourself taken care of, and then you make yourself and other people happier by pursuing something that can make them happy. Again, depending on the person, that might involve making lots of money, or for other people, it might not involve making much money. Once you take care of yourself financially at a stable base. All right, so that's monumental. And I don't mean monumental this moment. I'm not looking for feedback in the moment or not. Right? You don't need to have gotten it right this second, but I'm just telling you it's a seed that you want to, water and such, put some sunshine on. Relating this how your mind goes about self-image, and how massively costly it is to do it wrong, and how it erodes respect and everything, versus having a vision for how you want to be. And then when you have a vision, it's not about the feedback that you're already there, or making progress is done by successfully revealing and gaining understanding, and that doesn't mean that you impose meaning on every piece of feedback. You don't know fully what it means. Every piece of feedback has some meaning, and you don't even necessarily know what that some meaning is, but the fact that you got the feedback gives you the potential ability to start getting some meaning out of it. And I've given plenty of examples. It sounds kind of abstract in one sense, but the minute you apply it to real life, it just works all the time, right? You go about revealing stuff, And you go meet with a potential client, and you're going to learn something when you have that attitude, and you'll probably come across better. And you realize, wait, maybe I can plan better. If planning feels intuitively like just having an algorithm for when you're going to feel happy about feedback and when you're going to feel like you're not having good feedback from the client, that passes for planning for a lot of people. It's just setting these like feelings of what they want and what they don't want. When you don't have that serve as an illusion, right? It's like eating empty calories. When that's not your illusion for planning, then you have to plan for real about how things might play out. And then it'll be pretty immediately obvious how to make some improvements on your preparation and context. I have a different slide that I can't necessarily get into now, but talking about like alchemist focus on preparation and context, right? So I'll just leave you with that little dangling thing, and then I'll go on. I'm nearly done here with the monologue portion here. So I just want to point out, Cotton uses feedback to help the client understand the velvet ropes. I don't mean to project on Cotton and put words in his mouth, but I'm at least just my understanding, however limited of Cotton's velvet rope idea. At least this is probably right, and you can just think about it. But there's probably something to this, is that if I imagine being Cotton, taking my client through velvet ropes, then I have a clear system. I'm Cotton, right? I have a clear system for what I'm going to do with the client, or what the system that they're going to go into. And when I'm talking to the client, I'm basically helping, whatever they're saying to me, I'm helping that reveal how I can reveal to them the velvet ropes, how I can reveal my system to them and show them how to function within it. Right? And so feedback isn't like moving Cotton. He's using it to help gain understanding, and mostly he already understands his velvet ropes, and so now he just kind of gaining, like helping guide the client to understanding of the velvet ropes of his, which is his system, or the client experience, which is basically he has a system for that, of being his client, where he's going to work on getting them traffic. But you can see it in light of this, in essence. The velvet rope system Cotton teaches gives you a plan for what to do with feedback. You see? And that's the hallmark of a good plan, a powerful plan, is that whatever the feedback is, you have a plan to turn it to your success, maybe not instantly. And maybe a particular client doesn't like the system and doesn't want the velvet ropes, and then you just move on. Right? But a good plan, you can't make a plan that no matter what the feedback is, you succeed instantly, necessarily. You might succeed instantly, but you might not, is the point. You can make a plan that maximizes your ability to succeed as fast as possible, but fundamentally what a good plan does is whatever the feedback is, you're going to be able to turn that to your advantage ultimately. And of course, then what you're trying to do with a plan is as what you're using feedback to help you with on your way to your building blocks and your ask the right questions about building blocks and bottlenecks. Right? I'll just say this sentence so you have it. Planning involves you're making alternative use decisions of resources, and you're doing that by thinking about what building blocks you're trying to build, and what bottlenecks you're trying to break. And the next one in the path that's going to give you a big advantage is what we call a semi-soft lock. And then you kind of channel your focus into that and your resources proportional to what makes the most sense to achieving that particular building block that's going to give you a huge advantage, where after that you could mostly just be competent from there and probably succeed. And if you don't know what that semi-soft lock is, then simple. Then your objective is to find it, right? And you do that just by building and breaking bottlenecks until it reveals itself, as always. So that's planning, strategy. Substituting association for knowing, right? Presupposing we know what feedback is wanted, value judgment on it, what it means, right? I basically covered this in what I was saying. Substituting association for knowing is what the brain does by default. Your mind doesn't know in the proper way of using scenarios and the law of non-contradiction, taking things to the extremes and so forth. What it does instead is it associates, and in doing that, it gives you more insight into what I mean by successive approximation. It takes your experiences with somebody, and it kind of, there's no new space created when your mind does this association. It uses future associations or experiences with someone or interactions or in order to form like more of a picture or more of a hardened picture if your expectations are met. Or it tweaks the picture as little as it can of what a person's like or what you know, and so forth, or how you're doing around for your goal. Or even just like knowing what's making you angry. Okay, how does your mind figure out what the problem is? Is it looks in the environment? I don't mean what the real problem is, but like what the problem is, like in my tone of voice that I just used. It looks around the environment for what's different in the environment that I didn't expect. Like if you experience expectation failure, the world doesn't turn out like you wanted, you got feedback that you hope not to get, then your mind looks around in the environment for what caused it, right? What's there that's unique, that shouldn't be there? What's you know, big and obvious and moving and doing something? A person is a good candidate, right? Or else some event or something. And then it blames that. It's like, there's the reason. That's an associative process, you see. It's not a seeking understanding process. It's like, what's there? Okay, I associate blame with that, or I associate the cause or the reason with that. Of course, the real meaning of cause and reasons, I've changed our understanding of that, or I've given you the building blocks to do so. But your mind's idea of cause is different, right? More simplistic. And it kind of conflates reason and cause together. What's the reason? What's the cause? They kind of have a jumbled meaning. Why, again based on association. The actual usage of those words gets associated, right? Every time you encounter people using those words, your brain formed a meaning of what those words mean just based on how people used it, not based on the proper method of seeking understanding scenarios, law of non-contradiction, not equivocating, taking things to the extremes, and so forth, in order to make it more obvious what the mismatching is, what the difference is, so you can see it better. Taking something to the extreme is like magnifies it, so you can see what you're trying to see distinctions. Your mind doesn't do that by default. It just associates and forms more associations about the same thing, which kind of either hardens or tweaks slightly. And that's why the first impression is so important, because that's your starting point, and then it just makes relatively small tweaks from there, or even ignores information that kind of forces too much of a tweak or is outside the box that person's already in, and so forth. You can even just think about this and notice it if you want. But there might be other times when I can find ways to expand on this. And I already looked at self-image and norms fully regarding this and talked about that well. So excellent. I'm very, very happy to have figured out the extent that I figured out. I very likely have more to figure out that could elucidate this more. I may or may not do that in the next week, month, year. But I might have something by next week. Who knows? We'll continue with like business-related topics next week. We'll be covering, I don't know the exact order yet, things like conversion, making your offer, business planning, things like that. All right, but excellent. I'm very happy for the progress we made. And let us. I'll just refresh this in case it matters, and then we'll talk a bit. I have a decent amount of time to talk today. Let me think how to do this. Megan hopes that I'll expand a bit more on the world of reasons and how to think about it as we discuss these current sessions. Let me do a thing again where I agree with Michael. Water travels the path of least resistance, right? That it's programming, like, yeah, exactly, great. So you saw that programming metaphor. Okay. John Susko asks, so a good revealing method is to simply ask a person for their meaning before moving forward, yes. And it is totally possible that that's a good revealing method. You don't, right, like a person themselves doesn't know the reason. Remember I talked about, it was a time or two ago, when I talked about those the experiment with the 4 stockings. And they were identical, and people and then experimental subjects are asked, like in a mall, or maybe they're given a little reward for participating, but they're asked to rate which stocking they like the best, and they're identical. But disproportionately, by far, they pick the one that they look at last versus the one they look at first. But then when they're asked their reasons for why they picked the one they picked, and remember they're all identical, then not one of them says, oh, because I looked at this one last rather than first. And even if they're asked, well, did the order in which we presented the stockings affect your decision, they look at you like you're crazy. So people don't really know their own minds, and that's been shown in a zillion different ways, and it's well accepted these days. Not that that makes it true, but I mean, this is one of those things where it's pretty overwhelming, right? Legally correct. So people don't necessarily know their own minds. Even when they give you their meaning, what they say won't necessarily be the meaning that you take from it. So there are times when that exact phrase will work, and there's times when, always though, you want to remember that you don't necessarily know the meaning of any feedback. There's a simple proof for that. Once again, how do we do that? We take it to the extreme. We look at the opposite. In the sense of meaning, if we take meaning to mean how good is our life going to be moving forward, right? Or first of all, if it's how likely are we going to achieve our objective, then that's crazy, because we want to, in a lot of cases, we can assure that we'll achieve our objective by not having a time frame and going after it the right way. If it's about how soon we'll achieve our objective, then often feedback, like we don't know what things mean, and we can have a disaster happen to us, and things can end up turning out very well within the year for us. Maybe it had nothing to do with the disaster, but our life turns out great, and yet we were really upset about the disaster, right? So we just don't know what things mean. We don't know what other people mean for sure, right? There's something I wish I could. I don't have a total. At some point, I may be able to explain the revealing process better. It's not exactly about things begin to fit together, although that's sort of part of it. You want to watch out with fitting, that you're not like forcing things to fit. But maybe I'll come up with something even better on that. But there's something about what I think I've already said that should be pretty actionable. Like you should be able to apply a lot or all of it just based on even the simple meaning. Ha ha ha, Susanna wrote, I can so relate to what you said about college. I guess I talked about this 57 minutes ago, and then Michael Monahan said the same thing. You gotta love it, right? That's how I feel after going to law school. Well, law school is at least pretty useful, right? In one sense, right? I'd love to have more of a sense of not that you know the law, there's way too much of it, but at least how it all works, how to go about figuring it out to some degree. Not that anyone knows what the law is until the judge rules something, but whatever. Okay, Julie writes, the mind discards objectives once it figures out what kind of feedback it wants. That's gold. Excellent. Yeah, it really is, Julie. Super. The concepts in this webinar really were pretty golden. I'm pretty excited about how it all came together, for sure. Joseph Baffy wrote, the progress that you thought you were making in school turned out to be helpful for other reasons than the goal that you thought you were making progress for. Oh, that's fair. That's true. There's ways that there's like negative progress though, where we got kind of some bad core ideas in our mind, like about competition and all kinds of stuff, how answers are more important than questions and so forth. But for sure, the stated objective, it may or may not have been helpful. Let's discard the past. That's great. Yeah, excellent, Cynthia. Yeah, you just have to accept it, because literally the opposite of accepting it is you say, I don't accept the past. And then what could that possibly mean? Like I must change it, or something must change it, right? It just makes no sense. You're not, and this might help, you're not saying that the past was good or not, right? It's not about that. There's no such thing as the past being good. Why? Why? Because goodness resides where? This is why our deep understanding of how existence works, like that you're interacting with your mind and so forth, and matters. Just like if you're playing a game, when I talk about thinking about how existence works, it sounds like esoteric or kind of out there in one sense, but let me phrase it a different way. Suppose you're playing a computer game and you're playing a person. If you have no idea how the computer game works, or the nature of what it means to interact with the world, or what your statistics mean, That makes no sense, right? So the nature of how the game works is taken for granted that we always want to know that when we're playing a game. The nature of how a professor grades, we want to know that, even though they won't tell us, right? They keep it a secret, and generally. So the nature of how existence works is actually just a very obvious, mundane, no-brainer. It's crazy not to think about what's going on with who you are and how that you interact with your mind and so forth. But anyway, what I was saying was how could the past be bad? The past being bad is an artifact of the wrong model for the world. Good and bad reside in your conscious experience, in your consciousness field. They don't reside out there in the world of reasons. Now, a contradiction inherent within a mind or something in the world of reasons can lead to bad. In that way, it's bad in the sense that predictably, it's like a little time bomb or something that might go off. But the past isn't even like that. Like the past isn't even a time bomb. It's just gone. And so it can't be bad. You see, what's bad is in your consciousness field. The past is not in your consciousness field, so it can't possess the quality of being bad. So if you're trying to drive somewhere, then it's obviously moronic to do anything regarding your current location except for figure out what it is and accept it, right? You don't like fight against the fact that you're standing where you're standing or sitting in your car where you're sitting in your car, right? It only makes sense to figure out where you are as quickly as possible and obviously accept that you are where you are. And like any amount of temper tantrum or being upset about where you are makes no sense, right? We can understand where it comes from with what I described today, where your mind converts objectives into feedback. If you got lost and you're far from where you meant to be, then based on your feedback algorithm crap, then you can feel upset about that. And then it's another proof that if you were really going after your objective still, of course you wouldn't be upset about it. You just figure out where you are and go after the objective. And that's always the answer of what to do in life, is you figure out where you are, accept it, and go after your objective, trying to go for revealing about building blocks and about how to build building blocks and how to break bottlenecks. And you can spot semi-soft blocks and allocate resources toward them pretty focused. Right? That's all you ever have to do all the time. It's always the right answer. It's not mysterious. The mind's stuck and confused and afraid and angry and frustrated constantly, or just euphoric. Presumably nobody else. You lost audio. Good. Good. And we're recording, which is good. Want to make sure I kept this. Wow, Julie, got a good reaction from Julie here. Oh my God, this session is excellent. You see, number 22. You don't want to miss. You don't want to miss one. Stick it all the way through. Remember, I said if you believe me about one thing, it'd stick with me. Right? I said that early on. See, I was right. At least for Julie. Yeah, bumper music for the next session can be R.E.S.P.E.C.T. by Aretha Franklin. Michael Monahan's on a tear today. Michael Long wrote, successive revelation versus successive approximation, mind blown, hashtag. Megan Lee says, distinctions and naming them like this bring clarity to awareness, observing, thinking, and application. We'll write down key ideas like foothold or handle to see more and more about how to put this into practice for every goal. Excellent. All right, I got it. Michael Monahan writes that I knocked out of the park today. Excellent, I appreciate that. Nice job, David, from Philip. All right, not even much. I guess I can drop the mic and go home. Not even much questions or discussion. Just stunned silence. I'm kidding. Let's see what chat has to say. This is awesome tonight, David. Can someone clarify definition of semi-soft lock? I remember going over it, but for some reason I'm drawing a blank. Is it a smaller objective that aligns with your main goal? Yes. Yeah, it's as opposed to like a fairly large objective, like let's say you're a book author and getting on Oprah is kind of my example of a soft lock, where if you do that, you're already in. It's like going to a major gatekeeper and having them let you in the door is what most people realize they want to do, or even having a client say yes or something like that. A semi-soft lock would be like maybe ranking a website for a term that is realistic to rank for. If you do that, then if you're competent from there, then you can really make SEO work for yourself in a number of ways. Just the experience you get from it, the confidence, the actual evidence of the actual site itself. A semi-soft lock is something, it's like a milestone or an objective or like a building block or a bottleneck that you break, where if you achieve it, you only really have to be competent from there. But it's not like a pure coasting downhill from there. But if you behave competently from there, you'll achieve it. And realizing that, you can really kind of channel your focus into that semi-soft lock. And instead, people like channel their focus into like the soft lock, like getting an Oprah or getting a client to say yes. I try to find something that's like clearly, if I really go for it, that I'll achieve it, and that and that's a semi-soft lock. And in practice, that is not a strategy that people go after, like use constantly. You can, I'm sure, if you search your memory, especially with a goal to prove that to believe that you're already right, you can find times you've done it. But I constantly, in actual strategy competitions in the past and so forth, would come out ahead doing that, and people just wouldn't realize to do it. Or what they would do is they might identify the semi-soft lock sort of, but they wouldn't identify it as they really could just fully win if they hit that, because because they could just be competent from there, which they could do. So they don't allocate enough resources. So I would allocate a lot more resources to hitting the semi-soft lock than they would, and they might not hit it, or I would hit it sooner and more reliably. Does that make sense? Like if I was doing client SEO, I'd get a site ranked. Like I would put all my focus into getting an example site ranked. And so I would accomplish it probably a lot sooner than many other people might. And then I would go from there, whereas other people might just kind of be confused about where to put their focus. And then in practice, that stacks, that iterates, and you get farther and farther ahead. You don't need to get ahead, but you make progress most efficiently. And then if you were to compare with someone else, you tend to come out way ahead of them. I'm not in the business of comparing myself to other people, but you get what I mean. Michael Ramirez wrote, Alchemy 22. 22 is a master number in numerology, a great Webby that goes along with it. I didn't even have to prepare. I could have just let the number 22 carry me forward. But excellent. That's always fun to hear. Kyle, what is the nature of epiphany? Is it possible to achieve truth in a leaping manner? Although even what I myself said about preparing, I didn't really prepare more for this webinar. So something worked out well for this webinar, and so excellent. Outside of my control, I just kind of did the same thing as always. But I've been happy with a lot of the webinars, but I'm particularly excited about this one. And by the way, that happens more and more. That's just the thing with the stuff that I have for you in Alchemy. People were excited all the way through, and I was amazed actually at how much you guys got and progress from the beginning, and how into it you were. But it gets easier and easier, right, together, for sure. What's the nature of epiphany? Is it possible to achieve truth in a leaping manner? In the sense of breakthroughs, yes, right? You don't control exactly when the breakthrough happens, though. You keep your vision in mind. You're asking questions that reveals things. That'll lead to more questions. You'll drill down into things. I was just trying to drill down into successive approximation. I was looking at different scenarios. You should be thinking in terms of scenarios and alchemy, the alchemy process of like you change one thing about a scenario, you add one thing in. Like if you're looking at successive approximation, you have a scenario that may or may not involve it, and then you look at it from a different angle, you add something in, you say, is that still a successive approximation? Did that make it better? Or you notice two different scenarios of a person like kind of listening properly and interacting and looking to reveal things about a person, or how to get to a vision that they're getting to in a conversation with someone versus someone that's just kind of pushing and feeling happy about good feedback and frustrated about bad feedback and that sort of thing. And you look at the difference for those, and those are pretty different. Then you try to look at individual elements of what's different, and you might try to change one scenario into the other, kind of one little change at a time or concept at a time. And all of these things can lead to a sort of breakthrough, in case that helps. I don't know if it kind of leaps in one sense, but not another sense. Like you make one distinction at a time probably, but you might have a cascade of distinctions quickly. One thing might open up a distinction that distinction then mixes with a whole number of other questions that you had that you'd partly revealed building blocks to, but you hadn't answered. And then all of a sudden there's like a ripple effect where, again, like alchemy, like you discover a new element or something or a new compound, and then you discover all kinds of uses for it, that you had a whole bunch of questions. Now, you'd only discover all those other uses for this new compound if you were overall a chemist who had a lot of potential experiments and questions open, right? If you discover a new compound but you don't have a bunch of open questions and things that you're working on, then you wouldn't reveal other stuff yet. Lori Colwell, I asked my question in the GoToWebinar interface, and then you're pasting it here, it looks like. And Lori, I had you in mind, by the way. Your feedback question that you'd asked me privately, I had that in mind all for days, and I didn't reply. I meant to reply directly earlier, but at least it really helped me. Just so you know, keep in mind for and figure out what I figured out for today. Lori said, "What do you make of?" So you guys never know what you pretty much know if you get something to me, I'll read it. What do you make of feedback that feels like a resistance, or like you should not be doing this particular thing? Could this be how, in your opinion, God communicates with us and gives direction? I actually don't. If I encounter resistance, I don't attribute it to God telling me something, but God could be. But you can ask a question. Like, resistance should open up a question where you try to figure out really where it's coming from, and trying to think. Let's try to think of a scenario here. Resistant, and I'll probably think of one if you want to give one, but I might just come up with one fairly quickly. So suppose I want to go out and network, right? And I want to get out there and start meeting people. I want to go on a trip to go network. And every time I go to do it, I feel like there's resistance to doing it. Or maybe I even go out sometimes to networking meeting, but I feel like God isn't leading me in that direction. But the problem is that it makes it way too easy to cop out, right? Those feelings of resistance can come from other places. And what do I do about that resistance? I get around resistance quite well by if the vision overall is something I want, then normally I don't really ever try to head right into resistance. I'll either try to understand where the resistance is coming from and like break it down. Maybe there's a good reason for the resistance though, in which case there's a real good reason to take a different route. If I can't find a good reason for the resistance, then sometimes I can just prove that it makes no sense. Like I can say to my mind, do we, so to speak. I'm being a little simplistic here, and I pointed out that I as a being, I'm not talking to my mind. It's just my mind talking to itself, to one part talking to another. We're simulating it, but you kind of are watching it and guiding it to happen in some way. So you can say, well, do I want this vision? Do I overall? And is it pretty clear that I do? And maybe you don't, but if you do, then you could say, well, is there a better way than going out and networking? And maybe there is, maybe there isn't. Maybe there's two ways, and I pick the one that I feel like I'd rather do and try that and see how that works. I'm trying to think of something where there's resistance and it's a good thing. Like, suppose that I'm thinking about making a new plan to make a whole bunch more money, and I feel resistance, like I don't really want to do this that much. Maybe part of it is because it involves some other people doing stuff they don't really want to do very much. And then that's good to notice that. Like, a feeling of resistance, a little bit like a feeling of pain, is a signal that something's going on to be figured out. Sometimes I can just ignore it and try to find a different route. If it might not matter to find out the core, like where it's coming from. Other times, just using your judgment, you can try to figure out where it's coming from. Like and especially if the thing is going to keep coming up. Normally I try to dissolve issues that are going to keep adding into my life, right? They're going to keep coming up, and I just try to bypass something if it's like a one shot, and try to find a different way. If there's a rush and there's no other way, and it's just like a little bit of resistance, I might just try to push through it, rightly or wrongly. But again, if there's a rush, there's never like an optimal answer. And so then you're just looking for like the least suboptimal answer if there's a rush. So hopefully that gives you some various thoughts. Shema writes, how do the goals work? I just say goal. How does the goal work of imaging desired objective? Oh, imagining. How does the goal work of imagining desired objective and be in the future self fit with LOI alchemy basics? Like in LOI, you called it a shortcut method, while alchemy gets to the core. Got it. No, this is a good question. Shema's asking me how my, when I say good, I'm sorry, I should have said the word clear. This is a clear question, and so forth. And it's not, there's not a misconception inherently in the question, is another thing that I'm saying. My shortcut method, my future self, like, it's more like you're imagining regarding an objective, like getting in a good relationship, then you imagine what the world would be like if you got in that good relationship. All right, and that's part of that's like the focus part of the focus, desire, faith shortcut method, or focus, desire, belief, whatever, that I've covered a couple times here. And I labeled it when I covered it in one of these webinars, in the replays in text. I labeled it. How does it fit in with the alchemy basics? Not sure if the question, I called it a shortcut while alchemy gets to the core. Oh, the shortcut's not incorrect, and then I explained, when I explained it once or twice recently, but once the first time, where I labeled it toward the end of a webinar in a discussion, I explained how it relates to the core actually. By me explaining it, it kind of helped show how it works. Let me see if there's anything further I could say to kind of point out specifically what you're asking. So you can desire something with all your heart, like let's say just to repair a relationship with somebody, right? Then you fully desire it. You also want to check to make sure it feels possible. If it doesn't feel possible to your mind, then your mind is going to block. It's not really going to go after it. And you want to believe it's possible. That's like the belief or faith part. And then I said desire, where you desire it. That means that your objective is hooked up to something that really like has motivation inherently for your mind. Then good. Then and the way you fit it in with the alchemy basics is that now that objective is set, now you combine it with what I talked about today and make sure your mind doesn't twist it into an algorithm for feedback. And you go after the objective properly. So you set it the same way as always with the shortcut method, focus, desire, belief. Now your mind's going to go after it. Next, you set yourself up for success with it by following the method I've talked about previously, but then I really showed today how it worked more, where you're achieving it by seeking understanding, by successively revealing. You don't know what feedback means that you're making progress. You're just, until you do. You might understand that there's certain milestones or semi-soft locks you want to go after, like ranking an example site. But then even doing that, as you go about doing it, whatever happens as you do it, you're revealing, something's getting revealed. You're getting feedback that helps you to ask more questions and use your, decide where you want to continue to go and do and so forth. Maybe you'll start ranking a site and you'll end up getting feedback that the words you're going after or something about the way you set up the site originally wasn't right, and then you start a new site and go after either different keywords or set it up differently. All the time you're revealing, you're gaining understanding if you're looking for understanding. Right, and always if you see red flags for the fact that your mind got rid of the original objective and converted it to like an algorithm for feedback, then all you need to do is bring back the original objective and imagine no matter what feedback you get, you'll turn it to seeking understanding. You see, so you like imagine. Whatever happens, you'll gain understanding. And you can imagine a couple of examples of that, like I gave you with the site. If it turns out that you go after the wrong word, or maybe you rank for a site, you rank for the words you wanted to, even rank number 1 early, but you don't exactly get just euphoric When you're successful, you don't just want it to mean to validate you. You want it to, you want all feedback, including things that make you feel euphoric, to open up questions. So if you're successful, you want to figure out why you're successful. And then you also want to think, well, what if I was going after a different keyword or a harder keyword or a keyword for a different type of site, like e-commerce versus local, like a local plumber or something, or an affiliate site. How would I have done things differently? So you want to turn your successes and your things that are not obvious euphoric successes, anything into a question. But it's fairly easy for people, once they hear this, to turn expectation failure into a question when things don't work out how they might have presumed they would hope. Even if they're doing things right and they're seeking understanding, people can forget to seek understanding when things are appearing right. And one of the things I do really smartly, again, presumably you take the spirit in which I'm saying that, but it's been very clearly effective for me strategically for a while in my life, is that when something turns out successfully, I am just as inquisitive, or more so, as when things don't turn out how I thought. Including like you're in a budding relationship, you're excited and you're having day after day that's good. Use that, still do the same sort of planning. What's the bottleneck? What's the building blocks I want? What am I doing right to make sure I keep doing it right and don't stop doing it right by accident a month from now? All of that. Just like I explained with ranking the site. Use it to launch more questions and understanding, not to just now revert back to feedback again. You see, very, very important. So thank you, Shema. And yeah, you can, there's the first time I talked about it, and then someone asked about it again, a webinar or 2 or 3 later, and I didn't necessarily label it that time. Excellent. Glad that worked for you, Shema. I thought that came out pretty well myself, given that I didn't know whether it would. So I kind of reached my objective there pretty nicely. Deborah Sewich. And a lot of these questions, right, you'll see that I don't necessarily know the answer. I know like a lot of the building blocks in some cases not. But you're seeing me often start where I don't know the exact answer, and then I start to try a scenario and build around and do the usual process, and then it turns out great, right? A lot of times. Sometimes I don't get to the answer, but it always, we start to build something, we make some distinctions and notice some things, and sometimes I fully arrive at the answer right on the webinar. Other times not, but every time you can kind of see how I'm not just getting like pushing and like, you know what I mean? Like you can kind of see my body language and the whole way that I approach these questions, where I don't feel like I have to know right away, or that I have to push towards the answer, or I have to appear like the expert, and I have to always sound like I know what I'm talking about, you know, or whatever. Oh, and because I inherently come across well when you do this successive revealing thing, it comes across great interpersonally, right? I don't have to worry about coming across smart, because by just doing this process, regardless of whether I come to the answer, I come across pretty smart. And Shema says, yeah, great modeling with how you answer a question. Yes, awesome. Deborah writes, acceptance without judgment is a very important concept when interacting with others and drawing them out as much as possible. And remember, right, we can have a proof where there's no reason to judge unless it has something to do with how we're going to act. And if we do, then we can quarantine the judgment about the particular that skill or that action we're thinking of taking, or that project. And then we don't generalize it. And then even if we come to a conclusion, we might realize that we might not be right, unless we for sure are, clearly, with the law of non-contradiction and scenarios and stuff, and stipulation and so forth. Anyway, she wrote, acceptance without judgment is a very important concept when interacting with others and drawing them out as much as possible, to have them reveal as much as possible about where they are and how they're interpreting what you're saying. Absolutely. Oh, and the judgment you can always avoid is doing this kind of overall superiority or inferiority, kind of implicitly overall between you and them, right? You'll never know enough to know whether someone's morally or overall in some other weird sense superior or inferior to you. You can't ever know that, period. Once you see that and accept it, then you always have that proof at hand where you don't judge someone in that way. And once you're not judging them in that way, then you come across well, because that's the way that's counterproductive and offensive, ultimately. And it'll kind of just come across in things you say and things you don't say. You know? even in like dominance amount of eye contact that I don't even know what the heck the formula is, but there's something about how if you feel more superior to someone, you'll be looking them in the eye more or less, and you can look it up online. But instead of memorizing all that stuff, I just have a core way of looking at the world where I don't feel superior or inferior to people, and then it works out pretty well. Right? Might not. Maybe if I knew exactly the amount of eye contact ratio I was supposed to do, I could fake it in certain situations even better, than get an even better outcome. But my life works out pretty well this way. Accepting, and there's just so many checklists that you can have in life of do this thing, that thing, and the other thing in a conversation. But maybe you can build your skills, and maybe that helps. But I haven't built that in knowing the exact ratio. Although it's interesting that sort of thing about all the different things that go into how people get an intuitive sense of somebody else. And one of them is like the amount of eye contact versus not indicates more dominance or submission. I think you look in someone's eyes less if you feel like they're superior to you. And so you actually, if someone does feel like they're superior, then they actually prefer that they like you, but they feel like they like you better, or that you have a more appropriate sense of your place in the world if you don't look them in the eyes all that much. But anyway, you can look at that. As I said, that stuff is more interesting for me and kind of opening me up and asking questions, not about even applying that, but just almost seeing how many factors there are that we can't even keep them all straight generally. That it's more of a reason why we need to attend to our core as we need to somehow simplify things in life, right? If we just try to make life about this detail and that detail, then we're too cluttered to get things right. Deborah went on to write, accepting where one is in the present is key, right? And going, exactly, which obviously includes accepting the past, like I was talking about. And that's what you're referring to is what I mean. In the present is key, and going from there is so key to me. Having objectives and allowing them to unfold on their own is a process of revealing. Thank you so much, David. Awesome Webby tonight. 2 exclamation points. Key concepts for me tonight are acceptance on all levels, and allowing the reveal process to get to the objectives and vision. Right, and this is yet another place where the property rights thing comes into being. And there's something I wanted to point out with that. If somebody violated property rights in the past, once again, it's in the past. It's not bad in the sense that bad exists in your consciousness field. You never need to feel bad about something, ever, period, future, now, past. If you do, then you accept that. But you don't need to add to it, is what I'm saying. And so someone violating property rights in the past is actually not bad in the sense of it needs to cause you bad right now. It is suboptimal in a certain way, and the affirming that it's okay to violate property rights is incorrect, right? Is inherently contradictory. But we can accept, again, if you don't want to interact with a person in the future, then that's okay. But if you're going to interact with them, then you need to accept them, at least, as I pointed out before, within the bounds of what the relationship is that you're accepting them about. But you cannot be, even when it comes to a property rights violation, you need to accept it if it's in the past. My issue with like government situations, the reason I talk about property rights violations is twofold. One is to declutter you from a bazillion and other judgments that are irrelevant, right, so to simplify things for you. But the other is to make it so that systemic future violations are eliminated. I just want to make the future better. It's not to condemn past stuff about anybody. You see, so it's not to give you an excuse to say, well, this person committed a property rights violation. That's why I'm going on and on about how bad they are and how crappy they are and why them cheating on me is such a problem. They violated my property rights. Okay, so that might be a new angle on things I didn't explain to you before, which some questions that I got and just thinking about it in light of that helped make me realize that I should explain to you guys. Jamari said, quarantine is a great concept. It really is. It really is. It's excellent. The day I figured that out it was a nice day, and applying it's been very good for me. Meet people where they're at. Accept them and respect them so you can interact with them. Then leave them where they are. Well, exactly. Laugh out loud. That is ideal for business relationships like at work or with a client or business partner. Correct. You don't have to be their friend. Just coexist, respect each other, get work done, and go home. Correct. Right. And once in a while, things have gotten untenable for me. Like there was an election where people that voted for a certain person in an election, I would end up, if they were my friend, I'd end up having all these conversations in my head with them and try to figure out what the hell they were thinking and why they would do that. to their fellow man, and so forth. And the actual practical impact of that election was like raising my taxes by like $100,000 a year, right? Or else armed people come and attack me. And so I would view it as like, why would someone that supposedly cared about me want armed people to come and attack me? So I would have these conversations in my head with the people, and they were kind of hard to control. And so there wasn't really an alternative, practically speaking, than to mostly just cut off those relationships until I could just physically deal with them, like in terms of, but then over time and so forth, that can switch around, and you can accept the people again if you can. So it's about what you're going to do. It wasn't even like I was judging the people as bad overall. Again, it was just that I personally, in my mind, was having these conversations. I wasn't really able to easily get out of it at the time. Maybe what I understand now, which is more, then I might be able to, but at the time I wasn't, and so you just have to quarantine it out for that time. Again, it's based on kind of your own situation that you need to do for yourself. But it wasn't that they were bad, that I needed to not be friends with them. It was just that I would have these conversations in my head that I couldn't get my work done efficiently. Michael Long writes, the exact thing that I saw in David's top secret deck, he's talking about for Magic, back when we originally met, like over 20 years ago, which impressed Mike when he saw what I'd built, was Merchant Scroll, which refers to a Magic the Gathering card, which was the semi-soft lock that the deck was explicitly built around, or our Ancestor Recall perhaps, and Merchant Scroll was to get it. I was so unimaginably shocked, and for years later people refused to use the card for the reason David had it, back in our Magic the Gathering days. Excellent. David Castro wrote, I don't know a thing about Magic, but every time you mention it, Mike, I picture yourself and David Mills picking up your cards with two finger like Yu-Gi-Oh! And with a smirk and just dominating. That's funny. I don't think I use two fingers. Oh, maybe, yeah. If you Google David Mills, what is it, Mike? David Mills Magic the Gathering or David Mills Pro Tour, you might see a video of me playing Magic. Happily, it's one that I won. Not far from reality when you watch some young David and Mike's Magic the Gathering replays. Right, exactly. Megan just dropped the mic. And the treasure map, oh yeah, I'll put the treasure map for those of you who are in the active coaching stuff. I'll put Greg's treasure map stuff in there tomorrow, or maybe later tonight. Megan Lee, absorbing the alchemy ideas is so calming. Even when I totally blow it, I can see why now. So instead of feeling bad, right, never helpful to feel bad about the past. But if you do feel bad about the past, if your brain's giving it to you, you don't need to feel bad about feeling bad. Right? Just you can at least not affirm like that you should feel bad in practice. And then if you're feeling bad, you accept that too. But you don't need to however that helps you, let it help you, but don't let it make you feel worse. When I say you don't ever need to, it's not where you should ever feel bad. And also remember, pain can be used as a signal. You just use it as a signal. And if you acknowledge the signal properly, then often the pain will go away, by the way, emotional or physical. Not always. So instead of feeling bad, or maybe always if you do it particularly perfectly, but I don't know how to do it always. But I do notice a significant alleviation of emotional and physical pain when you acknowledge it as a signal and then go from there, instead of trying to fight it or whatever, or just feel bad about the pain itself rather than looking for what the signal means. I can see why now. So instead of feeling bad, I can see my mistakes as building understanding. My mistake is building understanding, or just the whole situation, like anything, is an opportunity for building understanding. Right? It's not even that the mistake builds understanding. It's that any situation can be used to build understanding if you have questions and deal with it properly and keep your objective in mind. Right? As soon as your objective is not mixed in the alchemical mix properly, I don't want to say keep it in mind or not, but if your objective isn't there in a way that matters, right? If it's not interpreting this kind of in a simple, correct way, whatever that is, if it's not kept in mind in a certain way, then you won't be seeking understanding probably. So I can see my mistakes as building understanding and can start to create a scenario of how to clean up the mess. Right, and you don't even necessarily need to call it a mess. Current reality is not inherently a mess. It just, it's current reality. And if mess has negative connotation, then then you can think of it in terms of breaking a bottleneck or having a building block. You know, if something's an actual mess and that's a bottleneck for you getting work done, for example, because you can't find things or it's getting in your way, then you're breaking a bottleneck. You see what I mean? Jamari says, this concert alone has changed my mindset for the better in so many ways, Megan. It can never be a fail if you never stop building. Awesome, awesome, exactly. The answer to everything is creating a new space, building, being creative in the proper way. Basically, creation, building, and so forth is the answer to every, like simplistically put. But it's simple, but it's useful. It's like a shortcut, but it's not incorrect. It's maybe could be taken in an oversimplified manner. But on the other hand, it's just kind of profound that building is if you feel bad, if you feel good, whatever it is, build, create. Mike Long kept going back to that tonight. And another thing, when you're euphoric, don't let it cause you to stop creating and building. Of course, you can rest, right? But don't stop creating and building when you're euphoric, or else you'll have a fall. And then you'll be on this boom bust situation in your life. Yeah, Greg has his own tsunami coming, absolutely. Bryce says, just got back and missed the webinar. In terms of going through the Alchemy videos, I feel that watching them in order and taking notes of one note helps to triangulate on each of the videos, plus watching them multiple times gets me to understand them at deeper and deeper levels. Excellent. That's Mike Long's experience, and I think a lot of people's experience. The question is, will these videos be around forever? I feel like as we progress through, I get more behind. Oh, yeah, I mean, forever, indefinitely, right? But they're not going away anytime soon or any year soon or whatever. But I'm glad to get this out. You know, I always like to get to my next semi-soft lock is making it so if I get hit by a bus, then at least there's enough info out there for people to carry this forward. I feel the strawberry plant metaphor David introduced a while ago in the Facebook post he posted before relates to the fact that I can only go at a certain pace and I'm comfortable with. Love it. That's awesome, Bryce. That is beautiful. Go at the pace that you're comfortable with, as long as you're keeping sight of, you know, your objective and you're not just getting fully blocked or stopped. But from what you're saying, I think you're just doing great. Chad Kenny wrote, wish it was a little easier to pitch and catch on Facebook. So semi-soft lock is like something you go after that is in alignment with your main goal, stackable as a milestone that allows you to build leverage and gain momentum. Right, like if you're trying to use Facebook or LinkedIn or something and you're trying to get clients and you're finding that you're putting, like, kind of going all in on it, but it's not working out, then I would probably look for a better semi-soft lock, likely. But that previous effort probably wasn't wasted. There's all kinds of ways that if you seek understanding relative to your overall vision, that you can find whatever meaning and usefulness out of what you did and continue. I used to play Magic the Gathering, James Allen writes, albeit as a complete amateur, and get inspired to make comebacks every couple of years, playing it for a few weeks with friends. If it's not too much of a trade secret, could you share what a semi-soft lock might look like in Magic? That's so funny. Possibly, it's kind of a little bit dependent on the cards that are current with the current sets. Is it maybe focusing more on getting the right number of lands out, even at the expense of losing some life? So by mid to late game, you're really limited by the mana you have. Feel free to skip over this one if it won't be valuable to enough alchemists, but it's a scenario I could definitely relate to. That's funny. I would say it's relative to the format, like the cards that are at hand in general. There's also it's related to building a deck often more than when you're playing. That you're realizing what objective you're going after. It helps you to build it properly and prepare more properly. Of course, it could be helpful when you're playing, but more like you build it around that and then you play accordingly. But it's hard for me to think of anything that's not either obvious already or that, but it really relates to the cards at hand, like the particular set, at least on the spur of the moment in my head. Megan Lee wrote, resistance. I've been thinking a lot for a couple of weeks about what you said. What does a breakthrough look like? Resistance is essentially gone and blurriness is essentially gone. Oh, that's a quote from me. What does a breakthrough look like? Resistance is essentially gone and blurriness is essentially gone. at least relative to that one distinction, right? I don't mean overall. One application that and then going on to read what Megan wrote, one application is that I've identified that good health is foundational and a strategic goal, and have gathered knowledge and experience, but understanding must be missing because I still resist healthy eating at night and seem to decide to go for blurriness and eat unhealthy comfort food when I'm tired or hungry or occasionally sad. I'm seeking a true breakthrough so I can be calm and consistent with healthy eating. What's the next bottleneck and next building block? Let me see if I can figure anything out useful for that. So now, if you're not actively sick, then I find, just practically speaking, it's more of a question of energy. Maybe what's going on is, remember, my focus is our faith, where, first of all, the objective might not be really tied up. Like if you imagine being in good health, and imagine that scenario where you're in good health, try to get a sense of how strongly you desire that. And you could compare that with, like, if you got like a few clients and ranked them and you were off and running with that and all that was happening, and see how much you compare how juiced you are by those two visions. And if you're way more juiced by the clients that you're already successfully fulfilling, then that gives you a relative comparison, first of all, right there, about where, like, intuitively, like, what your mind, like, feels like going after with objectives. Now, if you are very juiced by the idea of like good health, which in and of itself is kind of, again, it's kind of blurry to begin with, right? But you want to have a vision of exactly what that means. But if it like involves maybe like being on the path to living, you know, till 120 or whatever, then also you want to get a sense of what that looks like. You can envision living to 120 with good mobility and energy and eyesight and, you know, and mental. That's not going to be really a bottleneck for you right now with a more immediate goal. But you can choose which one do I want to overall go after. Lori is saying that by logging everything I ate into MyFitnessPal, you saw how much I was eating, and then even logging everything you eat into an app, whether you actually do that is going to be related to how much you really want. Your mind inherently really wants that goal, whether it's connected up. Another thing I do is I declutter. So for me, when I go after, I maintain decent health, or probably proportional to most people in the world, like fairly good, you know, eating and health, but nothing like over the top, especially with exercise. I don't really do much with that. I just walk a decent amount rather than drive and so forth to places that I go, or when I'm on the phone, rather than just sit there. But my plan for achieving better health than that, which I think I will go for, is to like declutter in my life, and where for me I don't necessarily see actively going after a financial goal or really building a business in a creative way for me going after like exercise at the same time currently doesn't happen. Now it could happen together theoretically for me, and it's not like, wouldn't necessarily be impossible for you to look into that, although I haven't. The part of this is when you have, and everything I'm saying here is applicable to everyone. I'm giving general, you know, meta strategies here, regardless of the health thing. And what I'm about to say will be the same. When you have a sense that you want to achieve something, so one of the first things is whether it gets integrated in your mind and you feel it subconsciously, more thoroughly, right? But the other is, what am I saying here? Oh, to communicate more with your whole mind, clarity. To get clarity, you go through the scenario. Like you can imagine that it's late, you're a little tired, you're hungry, you eat comfort food, and then you picture that food going into your body, then you picture it, how does your body process that? And you picture it takes a bit of it and says, ooh, let's make some fat. You picture that fat, where it goes in your body, picturing it sitting there, picturing how much exercise you might have to do to get rid of that fat. And by going through that whole scenario and playing it out, and keep playing it out and see where it goes, and then say, well, if I do that one night, then that's going to happen the next night, and then there's going to be more fat, and then you picture that, where it goes. And that might help your brain see that it doesn't want it, especially if when you picture that, you feel a sense of like, no, I really don't want that, like intuitively, not just intellectually. Then it means your brain kind of in a more complete way, subconsciously kind of got it. And that may help you. It's inherently blurry to like cut down on something, eliminating a certain behavior. Could be a food type, it could be eating past a certain time, but making a very clear thing that you are or are not doing. Like if I tried to eat like a little bit of carbs but not too much before a Monday evening webinar or even before a Sunday morning one, then that wouldn't work out that well, right? I just don't eat any. And then that's easy. It's not hard for me. And plus I'm motivated because I don't want to just have my mind be kind of relatively fuzzy when I'm doing these. Shema wrote, sometimes it seems my desire is more for comfort than good health overall. Oh, right, and then when you carry that through, you can ask, is there something that would get me the same benefit, like that comfort, that wouldn't get me the drawback of adding some fat where I don't want it, which also would decrease my energy and maybe make a stroke more likely or whatever is the case. I'm not really trying to make scientific statements about health right now. I'm just kind of being simple in order to illustrate the other concepts that I'm talking about. So then you could look to substitute. Is there a way I can get the benefit without the drawback? And that has to do with the clusters. Follow the fat. Yeah. Instead of follow the money, follow the fat. And then remember the cluster idea of if you're getting comfort with food that's causing fat and ill health, then say, is there a way that I can get the comfort without that? And then if you figure it out, don't just drop it after thinking of it intellectually. What you could do, play out the scenario in your mind. And the more thoroughly you play out the alternative scenarios, until if you feel like the alternative for comfort when you're playing out the scenarios in your mind, kind of try to work it through ideally until it looks just as appealing or even more appealing overall, and then that'll help you. It's one thing to kind of intellectually say, oh, I'm going to do this instead of that, but when you run through a scenario, you're having much different communication back and forth between you and your mind in essence. Yeah, some people can do that. Like, or you just eat what you eat without conflict. Definitely not perfect. I could do that until I hit about 27 years old, and then blam. I started to gain like about 30 pounds doing the exact same thing it felt like I was doing previously. And then I stopped the weight gain. I didn't really go back and lose it, but I didn't gain any more either. For like 8 years, I've stayed the same, or at one point I lost 10 pounds and kept that off about half a year ago. Go me. Julie Curry wrote, the problem with voting for government is that for most of us, it's about voting for what we perceive to be the lesser of two evils. Oh, I have something useful to say about that. Haha. Rather than something good. I struggle with knowing an alternative to a system that taxes us, as I don't know how else we were ensured that the necessary structures are there that are needed to support people who need it. Okay, a couple quick things. I tried to go into the weeds these days too much with government, although I've gotten, I don't know how this is possible, but I've gotten like no negative, not that some people haven't felt negative and just kept quiet about it. I understand that can happen and likely, presumably did happen, but I've gotten not one negative blowback. And maybe just the overall context of being foundational, obviously, is helpful. Anyhow, literally, voting for the lesser of two evils is actually exactly what you should do. I hear people or see people commenting, not here, just outside of OMG, like on newspaper articles and stuff, all the time, oh, I refuse anymore to vote for the lesser of two evils. Actually, when you understand that government is mafia, literally, in the sense, it is like organized crime. I'm not name calling. I'm saying literally. That's all. It's just the organized crime that won. Like they're the gang that beat the other gangs currently. They're running a protection racket, right? We pay them, or else they actually hurt us directly. It's not just that they don't protect us from people; they'll actually come after us specifically and so forth. If you were voting, if in your town the mafia moved in and made life a lot worse for people, but they let you vote for who was going to be like the head of the mafia, or at least the head spokesperson or whatever for the mafia, then you would be voting for the lesser of two evils, but it would make perfect sense to vote for the lesser of two evils. If one of the mafia figures was clearly going to be more mild than the other, then you would for sure vote for the one that was going to be more mild, you see? And you actually would. You wouldn't, and as a matter of fact, the idea of looking for the right mafia leader to save you would be the fallacy. So the fallacy is thinking that there's something other than voting for the lesser of two evils and trying to find your savior in a person running for president or whatever. You see? So you do actually vote for the lesser of two evils, and you can do it with a full happy heart and conscience. Regarding the necessary structures, this is an example of the beauty of the law of non-contradiction and clarity. You do not need to know the answer. That's part of understanding how to know what's true, and it's awesome. You don't need to know the right answer sometimes to know that a certain thing is the wrong answer. And I use the example of OMG. Like I said, I didn't know who on earth could. I didn't really know how to make the coaching work right, but I knew that it wouldn't work right, for example, if the coach wasn't doing what they were saying. I didn't necessarily know how to find someone that was making good money online and be willing to show what they were actually doing. Sometimes people will make some money and then show kind of a plastic, sanitized version of what they're doing, or mix with a lot of theory and what they think will sound good and so forth. But anyhow, I didn't know how to achieve that necessarily, but I knew I didn't want it the opposite. If back when there was like full-on horrific, real, what we think of as real full slavery, human ownership in the full sense of the word, or the worst sense of the word, anywhere around the world, including America, then when do you free the slaves? I mean, right away, even if you don't know how else you're going to have the cotton picked, right? So you focus on what you know and you build from there. You don't need to know, like that's what I say about cutting down the gray area. You don't need to resolve all of the gray area to make some progress. To know, okay, I don't want that, so I don't do that. If you're dealing with a person who's cutting you down, even if there's benefits, but they're cutting you down, if you know for some reason that person is not going to be, is not going to take you where you want to go by being in a relationship with them, then you do have to drop it. If you're not sure, then you can stick with it and try to gain understanding, right? And a lot of times you can be unsure. But if for some reason you know, then you drop it. So that's how it works. We don't need to know. And that's also what successive revealing is. Oh, what a beautiful example of successively revealing is. We won't know necessarily until we stop doing the evil. We didn't know how the cotton would be picked until slaves were freed. And so we'll find out after. If it was something more extreme. Again, using extremes helps to elaborate things. If you think of something more extreme, if I proposed like harvesting the organs of children and selling them. Including like our own children, and selling them in order to pay for government, we would say, no, we don't do that no matter what. I would rather not harvest the organs of my children and other people's children than have a school system, right? Then you can see that you just stop doing the thing that's clearly wrong. And then it becomes a matter of, the thing with taxes, it's also a great illustration of something that feels so normal to the wrong way of thinking, because it's so normal, everyone accepts it. But in the correct way of thinking, it's clearly wrong, because we either have some property that we own, which can only mean own it morally, or we have no property that we own. And no property looks like anyone can be raped, anyone can be organ harvested, anyone can be killed, anyone's property, money can be taken any time, anyone's house can be burned down, any person can be burned up. Just we can pour gasoline on them and burn it, because no one owns anything. That's clearly wrong, and no one lives like that for themselves, right? Everyone acts like people do own some property. As soon as we have the idea that people own some property, then we can realize that we can't say that there's no such thing as people own some property, and yet, as long as some people are just sure that they have a better use for that property, that they can take it. That we don't own any property. If someone else could just get in their head, or some group of people can just get it in their head that they have a better use for my money or my body, that they think that they're using my body for jury duty, or using my money for paying teachers, is going to, or sending my money to Iran, right, to fund terror, is a better use of my money, then they can just take it from me. Then I don't own any property whatsoever. There's no such thing as owning any property. I don't even own the part they haven't taken yet. Because if they can just take any time they want, then how do we say I morally own my property? If they morally can take any time they want, just by raising taxes or just adding new regulations or taking it from me, whatever, deciding I violated one of the 5 bazillion, million, billion laws that are written in nuances, and there's not even any laws. You have to know the case law, and then you have to see how the judge rules. And any of us can just get sued for everything we have and have it all taken from us that way, right? So more legally, the government owns all of your body and all of your money. You own nothing. Slavery is completely legal in America, as long as the government does it. Legally, you own nothing. You are a slave to the government. All of your money and your property is owned by the government. They can take it all. But the question is, morally, do you own anything? And of course you must. And it doesn't matter what uses other people can come up with for your money. What are we at here? 2.5 hours. Anna Kaona wrote, any situation can be used to build understanding. Phew, what a whopper there. Correctamundo. Beautiful. Excellent. Exactly right. Thanks, Anna, for reinforcing that. Oh, you're very welcome, Julie. And of course, any time if I seem like adamant or like I'm attacking an idea, I'm just sort of get it strategically into ideas. I'm never ever coming after any of you guys at all, in the least. And I couldn't appreciate you more, Julie. You're just awesome, and just been the whole way through. Of course, I think that was fairly obvious, but just on the tiny, tiny chance that I looked aggressive in any way towards you, I certainly didn't feel that way, and I just felt appreciative that you brought that up. Brian, not to create an association here, more of an analogy to the state of water being hydrophobic. No, not the fear of water. When water maintains its own state of being non-polarized with surrounding molecules, until both the water and the surrounding molecules became polarized in a cohesive state of the water's molecular state. I'm probably going to let people need to read this on their own. It'll get too lost auditorially. Oh, let me see here. Yet it can take another ingredient in the solution to establish final. Is this a method of understanding our own tipping point? I probably at this point won't be able to wrap my head around that well enough on this webinar. I might have been able to 45 minutes ago. So you might have a really clear question. My mind just might be entering a little bit of a fuzzy state. I have a fairly good background with this stuff, but the vocabulary here is a little bit pushing it for me with the water. Anyway, so that's, let me just give this last paragraph a quick try. Is this a method of understanding our own tipping point, a threshold between either full acceptance of or the full resistance of something down the absolute whole, not just some of the molecules within the whole? A dye dissolves completely. It probably can. We either fully accept or fully resist something. Let me think here. I don't know. We can really live within a contradiction pretty, like we can have vectors going in different directions, so it actually may not. And I might be able to take some time and take a look at this later. I know that it's not necessarily like fully urgent and you're fine with dropping it, but it's kind of a little bit interesting me to kind of take a look at this. But our mind really can maintain a state of contradictory goals, conflicting goals, and so forth. And it doesn't like come to a full stop. It just sort of, they just kind of sit there fighting. Sometimes it gets sort of resolved where you have like one kind of vector in one direction or goal and one another, and then your mind resolves into like a weak going after the real objective, like a weak vector in that direction. Or you can be going after it strongly with like the brakes on, with one foot on the gas, one foot on the brake. So I don't know with the mind, that doesn't necessarily have to be one or the other, but I might be misinterpreting what you're saying. That's just kind of a surface sense from your last paragraph. Joseph Baffy wrote, and I'll wrap things down pretty soon now. Thank you so much again, David. I need to hear these webbies several times to get the concepts down. This one will be no different. I'm grateful to be able to participate with you all. I feel honored to have gotten to meet you all as much as Facebook interaction is allowed. I have been alchemized. That's wonderful. And Mike wrote a story with magic that Brian and others might be quite interested in. Wow, all these pictures. Look at that. It brings back memories. Ziela writes, thank you for another wonderful webinar, David. I'm just curious on how to know if you should let go of a goal. When should you stop? Lori Colwell seconded that motion. That is a really good question, something I've always wondered. Okay, first of all, the more you declutter, the more life is, especially that self-image thing about trying to prove that you're good, the more you can see more clearly. Remember, nearly every goal is just a tactical objective. if you refer to, I think it's webinar number 10 for Alchemy, that I did more publicly about, was about winning, playing to win. But also I've talked about this even throughout, where we have the overall goal where we want max happiness, so to speak, max joy, whatever, max goodness in our experience, and to dissolve bad, experience for contradictions that lead to it and so forth. So we have the overall goal of goodness for people, ourselves and other people, which resides in people's consciousness field. Everything else is just like a tactical thing on the way to that, unless we can kind of prove logically how it's an important stepping stone, or we can do maybe with some deeper things. So, but if you haven't proved it with the law of non-contradiction and so forth, that a goal is definitely something that you want to go after, then you don't know whether achieving it is really necessary, right? And you just think of it more tactically. And then what you can do is make your own scenario to investigate this, Ziala, Lori, and anybody else. You can think of a situation where, like you're playing a game or doing some sport or whatever, doing a treasure hunt or whatever, and any scenario where pretty obviously you would let go of a particular goal. And this kind of, for example, and sometimes extreme things are kind of easiest, but we can even start poking around by saying, okay, let's say I really want to date somebody and they die. Well, obviously you let go of that one, right? And maybe some people wouldn't, right? Maybe, of course, if they're married, and then they might hold on to the person forever, that might be fine, but it's not fine if they want to also be in a relationship with somebody. Or if they would have been much happier in a relationship if they did let go. So you can, but you can think of one or more scenarios where you obviously would want to let go and try to get a sense of well, how does that work? And then what I would also do, I'm using this obviously as a way to also show you my process for scenarios and investigating things. Come up with some scenarios where you clearly would not want to let go of the goal, but where you might feel like you'd want to, like a little resistance, like Lori asked about, toward the goal, but where it clearly would be better to keep going, to keep after the goal. One thing I might think of as I start to ask that question, I know that's not exactly a scenario yet, but for me it's kind of close enough, it's tangible enough, that you might be going after a goal, feel some resistance, but what if you were going after a goal and you felt resistance? Let's say you're going after networking and finding like potential clients to talk to, as a kind of a presentation or a meeting, even a phone or in person. And you were doing that and you felt resistance and you felt like maybe I should drop this method. But then you can ask yourself, well, what if in 5 more minutes I would definitely succeed? Then would I let go? Then if the answer is no, I wouldn't. I would keep going if I knew I only had 5 more minutes to go. Then it shows that the resistance isn't really necessarily telling you something, necessarily. Or that now what it might be telling you is maybe there is a way to try something different and see that there might be something where you'd use your resources better. I mean, like it could be true that you would stick with it if you would succeed in the next 5 minutes. However, it might also be true at the same time that you realistically won't succeed without a lot of resources, or maybe never, and therefore it really would be worth letting go and trying a different path to the same larger goal that you still think that you want to go after, like making money or making client SEO work. So you look at scenarios that contain one idea, you look at scenarios that contain a different idea that's related, like I just outlined. You try to remove one thing or say, well, what if I remove this? What if I added this? Would it still work, or would that? And then you'll start to discover things, I believe. But that's basically my method. Okay, wrapping up here, but what John Weller wrote, if I'm seeking understanding in OMG with videos, notes, and action, then whatever happens, good or bad, is a win with a stronger foundation. Right now, I feel like I learn or understand more when something goes wrong, and I got to figure it out. Love the idea to review the win. Yep, excellent, absolutely. You want to, you want to try to get the same amount out of wins as losses or whatever. You're welcome, Ziela. Jamari wrote, and I may or may not answer more questions at this point, but if I read them and I have something, then good. But I'm kind of in a lightning round now. But it looks like Susanna seconded Jamari's question. David, does the mind see lethargy and fatigue as an opportunity to try to deploy negative thoughts? I feel like that sometimes. Actually, a little bit more guess. It's tough. It's probably a little bit more like they're less covered up. A little bit more like with drinking, where if you're acting a certain way when you're drinking, there's something there. I wouldn't say it's your true feelings are coming through, but there are feelings that are there. You, on balance, like if someone's drunk and they act a little bit more obnoxious, that doesn't mean that I'm saying that they're truly obnoxious. What I'm saying is that kind of obnoxious vectors, obnoxious like inclinations and feelings are there in the mix. Ordinarily, there might be other stuff in the mix, like inhibiting it, or genuinely good stuff, right? But there's probably some resistance and things that maybe lead to lethargy and fatigue. To negative. There's like precursors to negative thoughts there, or negative thoughts, period, somewhere. And it's probably related. Ultimately, this feedback thing will be very helpful. Mostly what we're afraid of is negative feedback, one way or the other, from the world. It's setbacks and appearance of setbacks and so forth. Or that we're not going fast enough, that sort of thing, right? Negative comparisons to others and expectations and extrapolations that our mind does. So it's not so much that it uses an opportunity. Your mind's always trying to use the opportunity to let you know everything, like things that are in there. That's why we want to give it quiet time. You know, like give it some time to talk to you. And let those, you can listen to those negative thoughts in the sense just like pain, where they're a signal of something, because they're having an influence subtly one way or the other, or their precursor, what they're kind of coming from, is having an influence, or like a little time bomb that kind of goes off here and there. It might not always be affecting you, but it's always sitting there ready to affect you here and there. So use it as an indication of things to maybe figure out. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's like an emergency to figure those things out. You still have to allocate your resources, but I would say there's something there. So hopefully that kind of gave you a sense. Irene wrote, thank you, David. I'm going to have to play catch up on all the webinars. Sure thing. And I know you wanted those transcripts, and we have some of those ready, but there's been a lot that I've been doing lately, and that's gotten pushed back. But that hasn't gotten forgotten altogether at all. Yeah, modern day godfather government, exactly. Bryce wrote, thanks for the help. Thanks, David, for the help. Really love the ties we made with the question today in Alchemy 3. Oh, cool. Concerning the government and the arbitrary reasons. Excellent. I'm glad, man. Shema wrote, I've been feeling that the best way to declutter is just go for goals I desire 100%. Very possibly, yeah. Like basically if that works. Like if you're able to kind of focus in, if you say, look, this is what I want, there's really nothing else that I really want that much right now except for this one thing, I'm going to try going for it 100%. Oh, this is actually going to kind of get what I'm about to say. Surprise. But I don't know when I start talking sometimes whether I'll have something to complete it, but anyway, you try going for it 100%, and if that works, great. By the way, it might work and for a while and then stop working because it's like a win. If it seems to be working, you could try to also get a sense of why it's working. And if it doesn't work, if you're trying to go for 100% and it's not happening, that's when there's an indication you need to declutter. If you're trying to go for 100%, but you're having conversations in your head with a friend like I talked about, then one way or the other, you need to kind of get those conversations away the best you can. But I do have more than one at a time. Right, so there you go. You want to try to get down to one at a time and so forth. So you can declutter that. So good to ask questions even when it's a win. Absolutely. John Ferguson said, David, I heard you mention that one of tonight's participants had privately sent you a question. How would I go about that, as I have one I'd like to send? If you send it to Mike at omg@omgmachines.com, he'll pass it along to me. Jen Cho wrote, thanks, David. So many aha moments. Another great Webby. Wonderful, Jen. I'm so glad. Chad wrote, thanks for the Webby tonight. Enjoyed it. You're very welcome. Cynthia wrote, the mind can contain a state of contradictory goals. Sounds like ADD. Meditation is so useful for this, and spiritual decluttering. Thanks for the brain hurt. It feels good. You're very welcome. Sean wrote, thank you, David. I couldn't listen to all the webinar because I'm at work, but what I heard was amazing. I will rewatch the webinar as soon as available. Yep, and either tonight or tomorrow morning I'll have that available. You're very welcome, Sean. Okay, wonderful, guys. Thank you so much again. Amazing participation every time, and it's not that I want participation or not, but it just amazing. It's kind of a simplistic word. It's like amazing just interaction, right? And we're building that amazing creation together, I should say, right? Like you guys are amazingly creative on these webinars, not participation. I don't even like that word for myself. Other people can use it, and it can be great. But wonderfully creative, guys. You guys just approach you're part of the webinar with such creativity constantly, and it just comes out. It's so huge. So so thank you for that, and you're very welcome, guys, for the thanks. Mic drop. You're welcome. That's awesome. So I'm glad I thought of explaining it that way. Not that I want participation, but I love the creativity. I love the creation that goes on from you guys so much, and appreciate it hugely. And we'll have this recorded for posterity to help people in various ways over the coming years. And so it's really just you're participating with me in this creative process, and the way that you guys do with your energy and creativity is greatly helps me and accelerates me, and Alchemy and the mission and the process and everything. And it would be so different without all the creation that each of you does. Oh, yeah, and of course it helps you. Like I don't mean like it's a self-sacrificing thing, but it's just wonderful all around. It's a great win-win-win for everyone, for yourself, for me, and for the people at large that'll listen on the replays and everything. Oh, and for the other people, right? From your perspective, it's a win for you, it's a win for me, and then it's a win for everyone else that's listening as well, and that'll listen in the future. So wonderful. Oh, that's wonderful. The semi-soft lock achievement with Magic the Gathering. Right, Mitch, I think you asked me. I think it was the second time, the first or second time I was asked to go over the semi-soft. Oh, that's different than the results. You asked me about the results formula too. But great, the semi-soft lock. Terrific. I'm glad that helped you. And you're very welcome, Sue and Julie. Wonderful. And great. Yeah, collective creativity. And often in a group, the creativity can go down in most cases, right? And the group think actually reduces people's creativity. But not here, I don't think. Boy, we're doing great here. You're very welcome, Shirley. And of course, John and Shema. 2 times a week. You like the 2 times a week? Yeah, absolutely. Got 4 more 2 times a week. And then I'll probably start doing a discussion like once a week or something. And but I'll try to do that where it's varied times or something like that, so different people can participate, or anyone that's dedicated can participate every time. But I mean people that have trouble because they're at work, or when I say dedicated, and it's possible. I'm not criticizing for anyone for having to sleep or work, but you get what I mean. All right, guys, I'll end it here and see you all next Saturday that can make it. You're very welcome, Kyle.